Hello, Paranormal M family, and welcome back to the channel. We're so grateful to everyone who has shared their paranormal experiences with us. We truly enjoy telling your stories, and we also love reading your comments, so be sure to leave one below. We hope that every time you visit Paranormal M, you can relax, unwind, and drift off to a peaceful night's sleep. Good night, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. So this happened sometime around 2008, when my girlfriend at the time, I'll call her Maya, and I were both about 19, maybe 20. We were barely out of high school and in a pretty messy phase of life. Because of some rough circumstances, we were staying in this little two-bedroom house with Maya's dad. Now, her dad was kind of an old burnout, but honestly, he was a decent guy. He had his flaws, sure, but he was doing us a huge favor by letting us crash there while we tried to get our lives together. The three of us probably didn't make the best impression on the neighborhood either. Two cocky teenagers and one guy who didn't care much about appearances? Yeah, we were definitely that house. The yard was usually a mess. We were loud too late at night. Sometimes the cars were parked where they shouldn't be, and we'd leave the trash bins out way too long. So naturally, there was tension with the woman across the street. She was the kind of neighbor who seemed to notice absolutely everything and always had something to say about it. This was before people were calling someone a Karen, but that was exactly the energy. She and Maya's dad would get into these ridiculous shouting matches across the street, both of them telling the other to mind their business. She had two daughters. The older one was a teenager, and the younger one was maybe 6 or 7. The girls themselves were always nice enough. The little one especially loved to talk. Just one of those kids who'd happily tell you every detail of her day, whether you asked or not. And I should mention this happened in Colorado Springs. Anybody who's spent real time there probably knows what I mean when I say that place has a strange vibe sometimes. There's just weirdness there. Strange stories, unsettling moments, stuff you can't quite explain. I grew up around enough of it that this wasn't even the only bizarre thing I could tell you about. Anyway, this happened on a warm summer night, probably sometime in August. It was close to 11, maybe a little later, and the moon was bright enough that the street didn't feel especially dark. Between that and the streetlights, you could see pretty clearly. Maya and I had just gotten back from hanging out with some friends. We were completely sober. No drinking, no drugs, nothing like that. On the way home, we'd been laughing and talking, and because the neighbor lady had apparently irritated Maya's dad earlier that day, we decided to be petty and park right in front of her house. Just immature teenager logic, you know? We got out of the car still joking around, and I was in the middle of talking when Maya suddenly went dead quiet and said my name in this, stop talking right now. I looked at her, and her whole face had changed. Her eyes were wide, and she was staring toward the front of the neighbor's house. She kind of motioned with her hand, and when I turned to look, I saw him. There was a man standing directly in front of one of the front windows. He had his back to us. He was wearing jeans and some kind of long-sleeved dark jacket, and he was just standing there, completely still, staring into the window. We were maybe 10 feet away, not far at all. We had just pulled up in a car, gotten out, and been talking loud enough that anyone nearby should have noticed. But this guy didn't react, not even a little. It was like we weren't there. What made it worse was that we were pretty sure that window belonged to the younger daughter's bedroom. She'd pointed it out to us before, all proud, like little kids do. So the second we saw this grown man standing there staring inside, both of us got this sick feeling. He was still awake. We told him what was going on, and he came out onto the porch to look. Sure enough, the guy was still there. So Maya's dad started yelling across the street. First just, "Hey!" No response. Then louder. "Hey! You hear me?" Still nothing. The guy didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. We watched him for another minute or two and finally decided to call the police. Maya's dad wanted no part of dealing with them directly, so he basically washed his hands of it and went back inside. Maya and I called the non-emergency line and explained everything. That there was a man standing outside the neighbor's house, staring into a child's bedroom window, that he'd been there a long time already, and that something felt seriously wrong. The dispatcher told us officers would come by as soon as they could and asked us to keep watch if it was safe. So that's what we did. And the whole time, while we stood on the porch talking out loud about him, describing him, saying the police were on the way, he just stayed there, motionless, like none of it mattered. That's when it started to feel truly wrong. About 10 minutes later, a patrol car turned onto the block. We were still on the phone with dispatch. The cruiser was moving slowly, and they had this bright spotlight sweeping across the fronts of the houses as they came down the street. I remember feeling relieved, like, finally, they're going to see him too. The beam passed over one yard, then another, then finally reached the neighbor's house. It swept over the porch, across the front wall, and landed right where the man was standing. And it stayed on him for several seconds. We could see his shadow clearly cast against the house. There was no question. The light was on him. He was there. Then, for the first time since we'd noticed him, he moved. Or at least, something moved. His shadow shifted, like he was slowly turning to his left. The spotlight started to drift again, and the instant it moved off him, he was gone. Not running, not ducking, not jumping a fence, not crouching behind a car. Just gone. I know how that sounds. I do. Even now, saying it out loud, it sounds impossible. But both of us saw the same thing. 1 second there was a man standing in front of that window, fully lit up. The next second there was nothing there at all. Maya and I completely lost it on the phone. We were shouting at the dispatcher that the man had just vanished. She kept trying to calm us down and get us to explain, but we barely knew how to describe what we had seen. The police car continued down the block, then circled back later and came to our door. The first thing the officers said was basically, "Can you show us which house?" And that confused us immediately, because we thought they'd already seen him. We told them it was the house directly across from us, the one they'd just shined the spotlight on. They looked at us like, "What are you talking about?" They said they hadn't seen anyone. So we walked back across the street with them and pointed to the exact window. We kept insisting, "You had your light on him, right there, for several seconds." They said they saw nothing at all. Eventually, they knocked on the neighbor's door and spoke to her. Then they came back and told us something that only made the whole thing worse. Apparently, she said it was probably her older daughter's boyfriend messing around, maybe trying to prank somebody. And we were just stunned. Because no. First of all, the man had been staring into the younger child's room. Second, who stands completely motionless outside a house late at night while people yell at him and call the police? And third, how does someone disappear in the middle of a spotlight? But I barely slept that night. Even if the man had just been some creep peeping into a kid's window, that would have been disturbing enough. But the way he vanished, that's the part that stayed with me. It wasn't just creepy. It felt deeply wrong. Like for a few seconds, we had seen something we were never supposed to see. And every now and then, even now, I still bring it up with Maya. I'll ask her if she remembers that night. She always says yes, so at least I know I didn't imagine it. So I live in Chicago, and lately the weather here has been doing that wild winter thing, where bitter, almost Arctic cold swings back and forth with these long, steady snowfalls. One day it's painfully cold, and the next, the whole backyard is buried under this smooth, sparkling layer of fresh snow. From our kitchen window, everything looked completely untouched. except for this one narrow path along the fence that my husband Mark keeps shoveled so we can get out to the garage and the alley. The rest of the yard was just this bright, glittering blanket of white, every now and then marked by little animal tracks. And in a city yard, you get all kinds of visitors. We've seen rat tracks, of course, and raccoons too. Sometimes stray cats come through, probably stalking whatever smaller creature was there before them. Every now and then there are rabbits. You start to notice that each one leaves its own kind of signature in the snow. One evening, we were eating dinner when Mark got up to grab something from the kitchen. A second later, he called out to me, all excited. "Hey, come here a second. We've got a rabbit out back." And sure enough, there it was. A big, healthy cottontail, sitting still for just a moment in the middle of all that white, its brown-gray fur standing out so clearly against the snow. It looked right at the house, almost like it knew we were watching, and then it bounded off. When it left, it made those familiar little 4-point rabbit tracks. Not long after that, the snow started coming down harder, and by the time I looked outside again later that evening, those tracks were completely gone. Then, around 9, Mark was back in the kitchen getting snacks while we were settling in to watch a movie. And this time, when he called for me, his voice sounded totally different. Not amused, not curious, more like confused, maybe even a little alarmed. He said, "You need to come look at this right now." So I went over to the window, expecting maybe another rabbit. But what I saw was nothing like that. There was this line of prints going straight across the yard, but not in any normal animal pattern. Not paired, not staggered, not clustered. Just one single line, as if something with only 1 foot had crossed the snow by hopping. It started maybe several feet out from the house and continued in a near-perfect straight line toward the garage, which sits well behind the house the way a lot of older garages do in neighborhoods like ours. The prints themselves were surprisingly large, about the size of a grown adult's shoe, maybe around a men's size 10. There was no tread pattern, no sign of a boot sole, nothing like that. And what really got us was this. If a person had somehow made those prints by hopping on 1 foot, there should have been some sign of support. A cane, a crutch, something. But there was nothing. Just these solitary impressions in the snow, one after another, crossing the yard and then ending. That's the part that really stayed with me. It honestly looked as though whatever had made them landed, hopped across our backyard, and then simply vanished. And before anyone says Mark was joking around, absolutely not. For one thing, the prints looked like left foot impressions, and his left knee is in no shape for hopping across a snowy yard, not even once, let alone over that distance. And as far as we know, there's no one nearby who's missing a leg. So now I'm left wondering, what in the world crossed our yard that night? Because I still can't explain it. And honestly, part of me can't help thinking maybe Chicago has its own strange winter legend lurking around out there in the snow. I still remember the first time I met my son's father's family. We drove out to spend the day with them so everyone could get to know each other, and honestly, it went really well. We ate, talked, laughed a little, and before I knew it, the whole day had slipped by. By evening, his mom asked if we wanted to stay the night, and we did. The next morning, we were all sitting around the dining room table when his sister started talking about something that had happened in the kitchen during the night. For a little context, they were very, very religious, so anything strange or unexplained immediately got labeled as something dark or demonic. She said her youngest had woken up crying, so she got up to warm some milk for him. But when she stepped into the kitchen, she saw this big, hunched shadow filling the doorway near the room where her brother and I were sleeping. She was clearly shaken, and before I could even say anything, She and her mom were already praying over the house and blessing every corner of it. The whole time, I knew exactly what she had seen. And no, I didn't say a word. Because if I had told them the truth, or at least my version of it, they probably would have told him to leave me right then and there. Looking back, that honestly might have saved me a lot of heartbreak, but at the time, I kept quiet. Later, when we got home, I told him I was going out for a walk. What I actually did was make sure I was far enough from the house that nobody would hear me, and then I called out for the thing his sister had seen. I know this is going to sound strange, but I wasn't scared of him. I've had entities around me for most of my life, and this one had been with me for a long time. I used to call him Imri. He was never violent, never threatening, just mischievous and a little too comfortable startling people. He's small, maybe a foot tall, maybe a little more, but he has these oversized wings that make him look much bigger in shadow than he actually is. Most of the time he'd stay outside, perched in a tree or sitting on a balcony railing, almost like he was keeping watch. So when his sister saw that shape in the dark, what she really saw were his wings. I asked him why he'd scared her like that, and as calmly as anything, he told me, "She doesn't like you." As rude as that sounds, at the time, he wasn't exactly wrong. Eventually, she and I got along much better, and by the end of that relationship, she had actually become someone I cared about. But in those early days, there was definitely tension. And that wasn't the only time someone saw Imri. A lot of my old roommates noticed him too. One night, my best friend's husband got up half awake to check whether there was coffee for the morning. He happened to glance out toward the balcony and saw this tiny figure with huge wings just sitting on the railing outside the second-floor apartment, like it had every right to be there. When I told him who he'd seen, he basically said, "Please tell him to stay outside and stop terrifying people before sunrise." That, of course, only made Imri think it was funny. He loved messing with people who were already tired and on edge, and more than once I had to tell him to knock it off. My best friend saw him too. So did my mother-in-law once, in the hallway of our apartment. Eventually, I made it very clear that if he was going to linger around, he had to stay outside. There just wasn't room inside for that kind of energy, and honestly, he seemed to enjoy the reactions a little too much. Now, Imri is one thing. He's familiar. He's consistent. He's almost part of the background of my life at this point. Those are the little shadows people catch out of the corner of their eye. The ones that dart down hallways, slip around corners, or move low and fast when nobody's expecting it. Sometimes I can tell people it's probably a pet that passed on, just checking in. Sometimes that really does feel true. But other times, I honestly have no idea what they are. Most of the people I've lived with are night owls, and I'm not. I'm out by 9 o'clock most nights, so a lot of the weirdest things happen when I'm asleep. My husband has told me more than once that he's seen shadows moving through the hallway in this apartment and in others we've lived in. The ones shaped like people don't bother him as much. It's the crouched ones that move strangely, the ones that seem almost animal-like, almost like they're creeping along the floor, that really get to him. And I wish I had a good explanation for that, but I don't. Just the other night, my husband and I were playing a video game in the living room when he suddenly said something moved down the hallway toward the bathroom. He told me it wasn't one of the pets. He said it was low to the ground, kind of squatting. He's described that before, but usually after the fact, not while I'm sitting right there beside him. So I turned and looked, hoping maybe this time I'd catch it too and be able to explain it. But I didn't see a thing. At this point, I'm starting to think whatever they are, they just don't want me to see them. And honestly, that's frustrating, because I'm the one everyone turns to when this stuff happens. My brothers have seen them. My best friend and her husband have seen them. My mom has seen them. My mother-in-law has seen them. Enough people have described the same kind of movement, the same weird corner-of-the-eye behavior, that I finally started calling them the creepers, because that's exactly what they do. They creep around corners, along hallways, just enough to unsettle somebody, never enough to fully reveal themselves. I've even tried staying up late to catch them myself, but my body just refuses. By 9, my brain is done. I'm sure I've seen them before at some point, but if I have, I don't hold on to the memory clearly enough to make sense of it. The strange thing is, I'm not truly afraid they're going to hurt me or my family. That's not the feeling I get from them. Mostly, they're just unsettling and incredibly irritating, especially for the people who have to keep seeing them night after night. I've done cleansings. I've pushed other entities outside. I've tried all the things that usually help. And they're still here. So at this point, all I can really tell the insomniacs in my life is to ignore them as best they can. Which, according to my husband, is a lot easier said than done when something keeps peeking around the hallway multiple times a night. And honestly, I get it. It's annoying for them. And at this point, it's getting pretty annoying for me too. I want to tell you about a story from Causeway Bay in Hong Kong, one that has unsettled people for years. Hidden away in a hotel stairwell, there's said to be an old spirit tablet with the words, "Ownerless Wandering Soul," carved into it. People have whispered for a long time that it was placed there for the restless spirit of a young woman, possibly a singer who died too soon, and that one of her devoted admirers left it behind so she wouldn't be forgotten. No one seems to know the full truth anymore, and maybe that's part of what makes the whole thing feel so eerie. Over the years, plenty of paranormal investigators and curious visitors have gone looking for that tablet. Some claimed they felt a sudden chill the moment they stood near it. Others said they heard strange sounds in the stairwell, or that unsettling things happened to them afterward. Whether you believe those stories or not, the place built a reputation that made people think twice before going near it. Then, in January 2026, everything took a darker turn when a controversial live streamer from mainland China, a man named Yang Deren, decided to visit the site. Unlike the others, he didn't approach it with any sense of caution or respect. He treated the whole thing like a joke. On camera, he laughed about the legend, brushed off the warnings, and mocked the spirit the tablet was meant to honor. At one point, he made remarks to the tablet as though he were speaking to someone invisible, and then, to the shock of many people watching, he took the tablet and stuffed it into his backpack. He even joked that if the spirit wanted to follow him home, that was its own business. To him, it may have seemed like harmless entertainment, just another stunt for views and attention. But for a lot of people, it crossed a line. The backlash was immediate. Many were angry not only because he had removed something believed to be sacred, but because his behavior showed such open contempt for beliefs that still hold deep meaning for many in Hong Kong. And that's where the story becomes even more disturbing. Not long after the incident, rumors began spreading that Yang Deren's life started to unravel. His followers noticed changes in him. He seemed more agitated, more unstable, less like the person they were used to seeing online. His content became stranger, and his public image started to fall apart. Some people dismissed it as stress or coincidence. Others weren't so sure. They wondered whether, by taking the tablet and mocking the spirit attached to it, he had invited something into his life that he didn't understand. In traditional Chinese belief, disturbing a wandering soul is not a small matter. A spirit without proper rites is thought to remain trapped, unable to rest, unable to move on. And if that spirit is provoked or disrespected, the consequences can follow the person responsible. So in the eyes of many, Yang Deren hadn't just stolen an object. He had interfered with something sacred, something already lost and unsettled, and maybe bound that unrest to himself. That's why this story still stays with people. It isn't only about ghosts or curses. It's also about respect, about the things people hold sacred, even when others don't understand them. Maybe what happened afterward was just bad luck. Maybe it was the pressure of public outrage catching up with him. Or maybe, as some still believe, the wandering soul in that stairwell refused to be mocked and forgotten. No one can say for certain. So, let me tell you about one of Hong Kong's most unsettling urban legends, a story that people still whisper about whenever the Ghost Festival comes around. In Hong Kong, the 14th day of the 7th lunar month is known as the Ghost Festival. It's believed that on that day, the gates of the underworld open, and spirits are allowed to return to the world of the living. For a lot of families, it's a time to honor the dead with offerings and prayers. But over the years, that tradition has also become tangled up with some deeply eerie folklore. And one story in particular has stayed with people more than most. Back in 2006, during the Ghost Festival, a woman named Yip Siu Lan, who was in her mid-50s, died after jumping from a high floor of Oi Ming House in Tuen Mun. That alone was heartbreaking. But what made the case so disturbing was the way everything happened. She was dressed completely in red. Red blouse, red trousers, red shoes, even red lipstick and polished nails. It wasn't just clothing. It felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Before she jumped, she reportedly scattered joss paper along the corridor, like an offering for the afterlife. People said the whole thing felt less like an impulsive act and more like the beginning of something dark. Not long after her death, stories started spreading that she had left messages behind. Some said letters had been sent to building staff and a few residents, warning that her spirit would come back for those who had wronged her. The details changed depending on who told the story, but the threat at the center of it stayed the same. She hadn't left in peace. At first, most people brushed it off. They thought it was just grief, shock, gossip, all the things that happen after a tragedy. But then the strange incidents began. Residents started hearing heavy thuds in the middle of the night, as if someone had fallen from above. People rushed into the hallways expecting to find something, but there was never anything there. Just silence. Then came the stories of footsteps in empty stairwells, whispers in the corridor, and glimpses of a woman in red standing motionless at the far end of the hall before disappearing. And then, only days later, another woman died in a similar way, from nearly the same spot. That's when fear really took hold. People began saying the woman in red had returned. They called her the red-clad ghost, a restless spirit full of grief and fury, unable or unwilling to move on. As more tragedies followed over the next couple of years, the legend only grew stronger. Every new death, every unexplained sound, every claimed sighting seemed to confirm what terrified residents already believed. Some families moved out because they truly thought the place was haunted. Others left because the fear itself had become unbearable. And honestly, once an atmosphere like that settles over a building, every shadow starts to look wrong. Every reflection feels suspicious. Every sound in the night becomes something you can't explain away. That's part of what makes this story so haunting. It isn't only about a ghost. It's about how grief, superstition, and fear can wrap around a community until no one knows where reality ends and legend begins. And then there's the question people always ask. Why red? In Chinese culture, red is powerful. It's tied to life, force, passion, and intensity. But when that same color is connected to death, especially a death filled with pain and resentment, people believe it can give rise to a spirit that is unusually strong. That's why the image of this woman dressed head to toe in crimson stayed burned into people's minds. It felt symbolic, like she had chosen not just how to die, but how to be remembered. Some reports suggested she had been struggling with depression and ongoing distress, possibly worsened by disputes and constant noise in the building. If that's true, then beneath the legend is something deeply sad. A woman who may have felt unheard while she was alive, and whose death became transformed into something larger, darker, and almost mythic. To this day, the tale of the red-clad ghost remains one of Hong Kong's most chilling legends. Maybe it's a ghost story. Maybe it's a tragedy magnified by fear and retelling. Or maybe it's both. Either way, once you've heard it, it's hard to forget the image of that woman in red, standing silently at the end of a corridor, waiting. You know, for as long as people have been telling stories, we've been terrified of the same thing: death. It didn't matter if someone was a king, an emperor, or a mystic hidden away in the mountains. Deep down, they all feared the same ending. And in ancient China, that fear gave rise to one of the darkest obsessions of all: immortality. One of the clearest examples is the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. He didn't see death as a natural end. He saw it as an enemy, something that could be fought, maybe even defeated. He ordered alchemists to make an elixir that would let him live forever, and he sent a Taoist seeker named Xu Feng across the sea to search for the legendary Penglai mountain. But Xu Feng never came back. Some believed he perished on the journey. Others whispered that he found something too strange, too dangerous to ever return with. Either way, the emperor's dream ended the same way all human dreams of physical immortality seem to end: with death. But what's fascinating is that Taoism itself didn't simply let go of the idea of immortality. It changed what immortality meant. At its heart, true Taoist cultivation was never really about keeping the body alive forever. It was about something far deeper, and honestly, a little more haunting. It was about the spirit surviving beyond death. To Taoist practitioners, immortality wasn't about clinging to life. It was about moving beyond both life and death entirely. The body was always temporary. The soul was what endured. And that distinction really matters, because somewhere along the way, people began to twist it. Not everyone who claimed to follow Taoist teachings walked the same road. Throughout history, there were wandering sorcerers and rogue alchemists, often grouped together as Jianghu practitioners, who borrowed Taoist symbols, talismans, and rituals for their own purposes. They promised people incredible things: immortality, protection, supernatural power. But their methods were focused outward. They relied on swallowing strange substances, performing forbidden rites, and trying to control invisible forces. And I think that's what made those practices so tempting. They offered shortcuts: no patience, no inner discipline, no real transformation. Just power, fast and direct. And that's where the story starts to become truly disturbing. There's an idea tied to corrupted Taoist cultivation called the 5 hells to immortality. Even the name feels wrong, doesn't it? Unlike traditional Taoist teachings, this belief claimed that enlightenment could only be reached through unbearable suffering. The path was described as 5 brutal ordeals: freezing cold, consuming fire, the destruction of the body, emotional sacrifice, and forced silence. At first glance, you might think these were symbolic trials, metaphors for spiritual struggle. But if you look at old folklore and scattered historical accounts, it seems some people may have taken them literally. The ice hell came to represent absolute isolation, fear, and abandonment. The fire hell reflected unchecked desire, rage, and emotional torment. The tearing apart of the body symbolized confronting corruption within oneself. The destruction of the heart meant severing emotional attachment, and the silencing of the tongue was said to erase lies, though in some stories, it erased something even worse: identity itself. What makes it even more unsettling is that this whole idea may have grown from a misunderstanding. Traditional Taoism honored the 5 sacred peaks of China, mountains believed to stand between heaven and earth. Pilgrimages to those peaks symbolized harmony with nature, spiritual balance, and elevation of the soul. But over time, because the written characters for peak and hell looked similar enough to stir confusion and myth, some groups may have turned that sacred journey into something darker. A path of ascent became a path of suffering. Pain itself became proof of devotion. And then there's another belief that makes this all feel even more intimate, more unsettling. In Taoist thought, the body already carries its own hidden enemies. Some Taoist texts speak of the 3 corpse spirits, parasitic entities said to live inside every human being. They feed on desire, fear, excess, and weakness. They whisper temptation, chip away at your resolve, and on certain days, they were believed to report your sins to the heavens, shortening your life. Whether you take that literally or as a metaphor, the meaning is powerful. The real obstacle to immortality isn't some demon waiting outside of you. It's the darkness already living within you. And that, to me, is what makes this legend so haunting. Because true Taoist cultivation teaches restraint, balance, humility, and non-attachment. But when those teachings are misunderstood, or worse, deliberately corrupted, the search for immortality becomes something twisted. It stops being about transcendence and becomes obsession. It stops being about harmony and becomes torment. And that leaves us with a question that's honestly hard to shake. If eternal life really were possible, what would it ask from us in return? Peace? Suffering? Wisdom? Or the loss of everything that makes us who we are? Maybe immortality was never meant to be ours. Maybe the real horror isn't death itself, but the refusal to accept it. And maybe that's the truth hidden inside the legend. The 5 hells were never a road to eternal life. They were a warning. You know, when people think about Hong Kong, they usually picture speed. Crowded streets, bright lights, everyone moving fast, always in a hurry. But the moment death enters the picture, everything changes. The pace slows. People speak more softly. Even the smallest gestures start to matter. And that's why funerals in Hong Kong feel so different. There are certain things people simply do not do. To someone from the outside, those rules might sound like superstition. But for many locals, especially those who've been to enough funerals, they don't feel silly at all. They feel like quiet lines you do not cross, out of respect for the dead and, maybe, for your own safety too. Usually the funeral follows a careful structure. The family chooses a funeral home and decides what kind of service to hold, depending on their beliefs. In Hong Kong, you'll find Taoist, Buddhist, Christian, and Catholic funerals all happening in the same city, sometimes even in the same building. On the day itself, incense is lit, wreaths are placed around the hall, and a priest or ritual master leads the ceremony. The family bows, prayers or sutras are recited, and the person who has died is honored in a very formal, very deliberate way. One of the most striking rituals happens in Taoist funerals. It's called breaking hell. A Taoist priest, dressed in ceremonial robes, uses a peachwood sword and performs a series of symbolic movements, sometimes over flames or shattered tiles. The idea is to help guide the deceased out of the underworld, through its levels of judgment, and make sure they can move on properly. It isn't really meant to scare the living. It's meant to help the dead leave peacefully and not remain behind. Years ago, some families would even stay through the night, keeping vigil beside the deceased until morning. That custom has mostly faded now, but the feeling behind it still lingers. The dead should not be left alone. A lot of these customs go back a long way. In the earlier days of Hong Kong, there weren't formal funeral homes the way there are now. Families sometimes kept bodies temporarily themselves, or burials happened in less organized ways. As the city became more crowded, that became harder and harder, and eventually charitable coffin houses were established. One of the best known was connected to Tung Hua Hospital in the late 19th century. These places gave families somewhere to keep the dead while they arranged burial, cremation, or transport back to an ancestral hometown. Modern funeral homes eventually took over, of course, but even now, they still carry that same atmosphere. Quiet halls, cold air, the smell of incense hanging in the background. A kind of heaviness people feel, even if nobody says it aloud. And then there are the taboos. These are the things people remember most. When mourners give condolence money, it usually ends with the number 1. So instead of a round number, it might be 101 or 501. After that, the family gives back a small white envelope, sometimes with a tissue, a sweet, and a coin inside. Each thing means something. The tissue is for wiping away grief. The sweet is to soften the bitterness. The coin is to restore balance. But here's the important part. You're not supposed to take those things home. You eat the sweet right away. You spend or donate the coin. You use or discard the tissue. Taking any of it home is said to bring misfortune back with you. Some people brush all this off. They say it's old-fashioned, that none of it means anything anymore. But not everyone feels that way. If you ever speak to people who work in the funeral industry, you'll hear stories, usually told quietly, reluctantly. Stories about strange sounds in empty halls, sudden cold patches when no window is open, smells that appear out of nowhere. I once heard an account about a family at a funeral suddenly catching the scent of barbecue pork rice and later realizing it was exactly the smell of the dish sold in the deceased's old cafe. And then there's the story people tell, almost in a whisper. A body was said to have vanished from a coffin during a funeral. The coffin was still there. The offerings were untouched. Nothing else had moved. Everyone panicked. Then someone suggested maybe the deceased did not want to be cremated. So the family knelt and made a promise aloud. And when they looked again, the body had returned. No one ever claimed they could explain it. That's the thing about death in Hong Kong. People don't always talk about it openly. So the silence gets filled with ghost stories, rumors, old warnings, and half-believed truths. Funeral homes become mysterious places in people's minds. Lately, there have been efforts to make death less frightening, with exhibitions and public events meant to help people face it more openly. And maybe that's a good thing. But even so, even people who say they are practical, modern, completely rational, often still follow the funeral rules. Because really, the question has never been whether the taboos are true. It's what happens if, just this once, they are. I want to tell you about an old tradition from the remote, fog-covered mountains of Shaanxi, a custom so eerie and so deeply human that it still feels like something halfway between history and legend. Long ago, when the villages there were isolated and the mountain roads were harsh and unforgiving, people who died far from home often had no easy way to be buried where their ancestors rested. And for many families, that mattered deeply. Home was not just a place for the living. It was where the dead were meant to return. So out of that need, a strange and haunting practice took shape. It was known as corpse escorting, and the men who carried it out were not ordinary travelers or undertakers. They were ritual specialists, Men believed to understand both the physical dangers of the mountains and the unseen dangers of the spirit world. You can almost picture it, can't you? A narrow trail winding through the dark, wind slipping through the trees. A figure in a faded indigo robe and straw sandals walking through the night, carrying a small gong and a spirit bell, leading the dead back toward the village they belonged to. It sounds like a ghost story, but for generations, people believed it was real. By the late Qing period, this tradition had become especially associated with Taoist ritual practitioners in the Shaanxi region. Families turned to them when someone died far away and needed to be brought back across dangerous terrain. It was not simply transportation. It was considered a sacred responsibility, one that demanded courage, discipline, and ritual knowledge. The preparation of the body was exact. The dead were wrapped carefully, often in dark cloth, and protective charms were placed on or around them. Talismans were used to guard the body and calm the soul. Every step was meant to preserve dignity and keep harmful forces away during the journey. One detail that people still talk about is the way the bodies were said to be moved. According to old accounts, the dead were secured upright with bamboo poles and bound in a line at measured distances from one another. In the darkness, from far away, it might have looked as though they were hopping or walking through the mountain passes themselves. That image, more than anything else, is probably why the tradition became wrapped in so much mystery. Not everyone could be included in such a journey. There were strict rules, shaped by spiritual beliefs and local customs. Only certain deaths were considered suitable for escort. Those who died peacefully were thought to be safer to guide. But people who died violently, dishonorably, or under troubling circumstances were often excluded because their spirits were believed to be restless or dangerous. In some versions of the tradition, women and very young children were also not escorted, tied to old ideas about purity, vulnerability, and the soul's readiness for such a passage. Along the route, the escort might stop at what people sometimes called a corpse inn, hidden resting places tucked away in lonely mountain areas. These were not inns in the ordinary sense. They were sparse shelters, used as temporary stops where the body and its guide could remain until the journey resumed. There, more ritual protections might be performed. The body would stay covered, the charms left in place, and sometimes a local caretaker would help watch over the dead until dawn, or until it was safe to continue. There was often a final soul-guiding ceremony too, where the ritual master helped separate the spirit from the world of the living and direct it toward peace. That mattered deeply. The fear was never just that a body might be lost on the road. It was that a soul might fail to find its way. And that, to me, is what makes this tradition feel so moving beneath all its strangeness. Yes, it is eerie. Yes, it feels supernatural. But at its heart, it came from love, grief, and obligation. Families wanted to bring their people home. Men like the old escorts, perhaps someone like Master Liang instead of the names history forgot, took on that burden and walked into darkness so the dead would not be alone. Today, the practice has nearly vanished. Roads were built, transportation changed, villages became less cut off. The resting inns fell silent, and the ritual knowledge faded with the generations. What remains now is a mixture of memory, folklore, and reverence. But even now, when people speak of corpse escorts in Xiangxi, what lingers is not only fear. It is respect. Because those men were doing more than carrying bodies. They were standing at the threshold between worlds, trying to make sure that even in death, a person could find the way home. Have you ever been to Bride's Pool, tucked away in the northeastern hills of Hong Kong? On the surface, it feels peaceful. There's a quiet waterfall, Thick green forest all around, and this strange hush in the air that makes people lower their voices without even realizing it. Most hikers stop there to admire the view and move on. But if you talk to the locals, they'll tell you this place carries an old sadness with it. And once you hear the story, it's hard to look at those waters the same way again. The version I heard begins a long time ago, during the Qing dynasty. There was a young bride named Mei Lin, dressed in a deep crimson wedding robe, being carried toward her marriage in Sha Tao Kok in a traditional sedan chair. The journey should have been joyful, full of ceremony and music. But as the bridal procession came near the waterfall, the weather suddenly turned. Rain came down hard, the path became slick with mud, and the stream swelled with rushing water. One of the bearers lost his footing. In an instant, the chair tipped, and Mei Lin was thrown into the torrent. She tried to fight her way back up, but her robe was heavy, soaked through almost immediately, and it pulled her down. Before anyone could save her, she vanished beneath the water. They searched, but she was never found. And that, people say, is how the place came to be known as Bride's Pool, named for a wedding day that ended before it ever truly began. But like most old stories, it didn't stay in just one form. Over the years, people kept telling it, and each retelling changed something. In one version, Mei Lin never wanted the marriage at all. She was being forced to leave her home and marry someone she did not love. By the time the procession reached the waterfall, her heart was already broken. In that telling, she stepped out on her own, walked calmly to the edge, and disappeared into the pool by choice. Some say her spirit still lingers there at night, dressed in red, standing near the water as though she's still waiting for a ceremony that never came. Then there's another version, softer at first and somehow sadder because of it. In that one, the bride was secretly in love with one of the young men carrying her chair. Her family had promised her to another man, and the two lovers could see no way out. So they made a plan. When the procession reached the falls, he pretended to stumble. The chair toppled, everyone panicked, and it looked as though the bride had been swept away and lost. But according to that version, the two escaped together into the mountains and were never seen again. Some people like to believe they found freedom. Others say their souls never really left the place, and that they still drift through the mist together. What makes the story cling so stubbornly to that place is that it doesn't feel impossible. Before a stone bridge was built there in 1906, people actually had to cross the stream. And if you imagine a woman in a layered bridal gown, traveling in bad weather over wet ground, it's not hard to see how one misstep could turn fatal. That's part of what makes the legend so unsettling. It sounds like folklore, but it also sounds like something that really could have happened. And then, of course, there are the real tragedies that followed. That's when the ghost stories grew louder. Some drivers claim that on wet, foggy nights, they've seen a woman in red standing by the roadside, raising her hand as if asking for help. But when they stop, she's gone. Others say they've heard quiet sobbing near the water, or the faint sound of someone slowly combing long hair, even when no one else is there. And one of the eeriest stories of all comes from people who say they looked into the pool expecting to see their own reflection, only to catch the blurred image of a bride staring back at them instead. Now, maybe it's just folklore layered over grief. Maybe it's the kind of place where one tragedy makes the next feel heavier, until history and rumor become impossible to separate. That happens sometimes. A real sorrow settles somewhere, and over time people give it a face, a name, a color. In this case, a bride in red. Still, if you ever find yourself walking through Plover Cove and you come upon the quiet, misty waters of Bride's Pool, you may feel it too. That strange stillness, that sense that the air is holding on to something old. And for just a moment, with the waterfall murmuring and the trees standing silent around you, it's easy to imagine that somewhere nearby, Mei Lin is still waiting, caught between memory and legend, between the wedding she never reached and the life she never got to live. Do you believe in ghosts? There's a story from Thailand that people still whisper about, even now. It's one of those old tales that never really fades, because it isn't just frightening, it's heartbreaking too. It's about love that refused to let go, even after death. This happened long ago, in the old riverside area of Phra Kanong, on the outskirts of Bangkok. Back then, there lived a young woman named Nalin, and she was deeply devoted to her husband, Mek. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for them, that was enough. Their life was simple, quiet, and full of hope. When Mek was called away to serve in the war, Nalin stayed behind, carrying their child and counting the days until he would come home. But life can be unbearably cruel. While Mek was still away, Nalin went into labor. It was long and painful, and in the end, neither she nor the baby survived. That should have been the end of her story. But it wasn't. Her love was too strong, or maybe her sorrow was too deep. Somehow, her spirit remained in the house, still waiting, still believing her husband would walk back through that door. And when Mek finally did return, tired and wounded from battle, he found Nalin there, just as he had hoped. She welcomed him home, and for a while, they lived together as if nothing had happened. Mek didn't realize that the woman beside him was no longer among the living. The neighbors knew. Of course they knew. But no one dared tell him. They had seen enough strange things by then, enough to understand that Nalin's spirit had become dangerous. Fear settled over the village. People kept their distance. They lowered their voices, because anyone who tried to reveal the truth was said to suffer for it. As the story goes, Nalin's grief slowly twisted into anger. She could not accept losing the life she was meant to have, and she could not bear the thought of anyone taking Mek away from her again. So the haunting grew darker. The village lived in terror, while Mek remained trapped inside this impossible, ghostly version of home. Eventually, though, the truth found its way to him. Can you imagine that moment? To realize the person you've been eating with, speaking with, sleeping beside, is someone you already lost? The shock of it, the heartbreak, the disbelief. Mek was devastated. Desperate for help, he turned to a respected monk, a man known for wisdom and compassion. In some versions of the story, that monk is said to have had a deep understanding of restless spirits and how to guide them gently toward peace. With the monk's help, Mek finally faced Nalin for what she truly was. And somehow, in that painful moment, everything changed. Her anger began to loosen. The illusion she had been clinging to could no longer hold. She understood at last that her life was over, and that the man she loved knew the truth. What makes this story so sad is that Nalin was never just a monster. She was a wife who loved too deeply, a mother who never got to hold her child, a soul caught between longing and loss. And when the ceremony was performed, when prayers were offered and her spirit was urged to let go, she finally released her grief. Before leaving, she is said to have made one last promise to Mek, that their paths would cross again in another life. That's why this legend has stayed alive for so long in Thailand. It isn't only a ghost story. It's a story about devotion, sorrow, and the kind of love that becomes dangerous when it has nowhere to go. People remember Nalin not just because she frightened them, but because they understood her pain. And of course, stories continue. Visitors talk about feeling an eerie stillness near the shrine, or sensing that someone is standing just behind them when no one is there. Some claim they've heard soft crying in the distance, or caught sight of a woman in traditional dress for only a second before she vanished. No one can prove these things, but that's how legends survive, isn't it? Through stories passed from one person to another, each one carrying a little fear, a little wonder. Over the years, this tale has been retold in films, television dramas, books, and stage performances. Each version changes a little, but the heart of it stays the same. A woman who loved so fiercely that even death could not quiet her. And maybe that's why people still remember her. Because beneath all the fear and the ghostly shadows, this is really a story about grief. About what happens when the heart refuses to accept goodbye. So whether you believe in spirits or not, the legend of Nayland lingers for a reason. It reminds us that love can be beautiful, but when it is tangled with loss, it can also become something haunting. Have you ever heard the old Hong Kong story about a flat on Nathan Road where a simple mahjong night turned into something no one could ever explain? If you haven't, let me tell you this one carefully, because even now, it still gives people chills. The story is often called The Four Who Played as Six, though some people tell it a little differently. It's about four friends, one cramped apartment, and two silent figures who should never have been there. It happened in the early 1950s, on a damp spring night, in an aging walk-up building along Nathan Road. Back then, those flats were small and worn, with steep, narrow stairs, peeling walls, and barely enough space to breathe once four people sat around a mahjong table. Still, that didn't stop friends from gathering. Mahjong was how people passed the time, especially late into the night. So four friends came together that evening. One of them, a man named Ming, had invited the others over for a few rounds. The room was hazy with cigarette smoke, teacups sat near the edge of the table, and the clicking of mahjong tiles rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Outside, the city carried on as usual, but inside that little flat, the world felt closed off, as if the night had sealed them in. At first, everything was normal. Then, in the middle of a round, Ming suddenly stopped moving. He didn't speak right away. He just stared past the others, his face turning pale. Finally, in a shaky voice, he said, "Don't turn around too fast, but I think there's someone standing behind you." Of course, the others thought he was joking. One laughed. Another told him to stop trying to distract everyone. But Ming didn't laugh with them. He just kept staring, frozen in place, like all the warmth had drained out of him. That was when the others slowly turned. And there they were. Two strangers stood behind the table, quiet as stone. They weren't speaking. They weren't smiling. They were only watching the game, their eyes fixed on the tiles as if they had been standing there all along. The door had been locked. The windows were shut. No one had heard footsteps on the stairs, and yet somehow, in that cramped room, there were now 6 people instead of 4. The friends panicked. Chairs scraped the floor. Someone knocked over a cup. Tiles spilled across the table as all 4 men lunged for the door and rushed down the staircase. They were shouting so loudly that neighbors came out to see what had happened. By the time they reached the street, people were already gathering, looking up at the building, asking what was wrong. The men kept yelling that there were ghosts upstairs. Before long, a crowd had formed on Nathan Road. People from nearby shops and passing trams stopped to stare. Someone called the police, and officers soon arrived to force their way through the growing crowd. They hurried upstairs and entered the flat, expecting to find intruders or pranksters, or at least some explanation. But when they stepped inside, the room was empty. Completely empty. The mahjong table was still there. 4 chairs were still pulled close. The tiles were scattered where the players had left them. Teacups still sat warm on the table. But the 4 friends who had run out screaming were gone. That was the part no one could understand. The men had been seen fleeing the room. People on the street heard them. The police came almost immediately, and yet somehow, when they investigated, it was as if the flat had swallowed the whole night and left only the table behind. In Cantonese, certain mahjong phrases can sound dangerously close to words about death and misfortune. And old players know plenty of taboos. Some believed the arrangement on that table suggested that all four friends were doomed the moment the wrong tile was played. Whether that was superstition or something darker, no one could say for sure. After that night, the rumors spread fast. People began gathering outside the building again and again. Some swore they saw shapes moving past the windows when no one lived there. Others said that long after midnight, they could hear the unmistakable sound of mahjong tiles being shuffled, then set down one by one, as if a game were still going on in the dark. A few even claimed they saw four figures seated around a table inside, but when they looked closer, the figures seemed to have no heads. Newspapers picked up the story, and that only made things worse. Some writers mocked it, calling it old-fashioned superstition. But in a strange way, that only fed the fear. The more people denied the haunting, the more others became convinced that something truly unnatural had happened in that flat. And no matter who moved in afterward, nobody stayed long. Some left after only a few nights. Some said they felt watched. Some said they woke to the sound of tiles clacking together in the next room, even when the room was empty. And some refused to say anything at all. They just packed up and left. Over time, the story became part of Hong Kong folklore. People tied it to an old mahjong superstition that warns players never to complete a certain pattern involving the west wind, or everyone at the table may go west together. In everyday speech, that can mean dying. So naturally, people began to wonder, did one of the friends make a forbidden move that night? Did they invite something into the room without knowing? No one ever found a solid answer. That's what makes the story linger. It isn't just about ghosts. It's about the blank space where an explanation should be. 4 friends went in. 6 figures were seen. Then somehow, no one was left at all. Today, if you pass that stretch of Nathan Road, you might not notice anything unusual. The building looks ordinary enough. People come and go. Business carries on. Life moves forward, the way it always does in Hong Kong. But if you ask the older locals, some will still lower their voices when they mention that place. And a few will tell you that late at night, if the street is quiet and you stop beneath the old windows long enough, you might hear the faint, dry clatter of mahjong tiles from somewhere above you, as if the players never really left, as if the game is still going on. And maybe, just maybe, there are still 6 at the table. I grew up in Thailand, where stories about spirits and signs from the dead are just part of everyday life. One belief I heard all the time as a kid was about moths, especially big ones that suddenly appear inside the house. People would say that when that happens, it can mean someone who has passed away has come back to visit their family. The way elders explained it was always the same. After someone in the family dies, especially someone very close like a parent or grandparent, a moth might quietly enter the house, settle in one spot, and then vanish without anyone noticing when it left. A lot of people believe that it is the spirit of the person returning for one last visit. I do not know how common that belief is in other places, but in my family, it was something people took seriously. I was raised mostly by my mother and my grandmother. My mom was busy studying and working, so my grandmother, her name was Molly, was really the one who looked after me growing up. We were very close, and for a long time she felt like the center of my world. When I was about 12, our family got the news that she had cancer. Everything changed after that. Her health declined quickly, and less than a year later, she passed away. Before she died, my mother told me about something unsettling that happened one night. She said she heard loud pounding noises coming from inside the walls of the house, like someone was banging hard from the other side. It was so strange that she even asked the neighbors the next day if they had been repairing anything or making noise nearby. They said no one had been home. In Thai folk belief, unexplained banging or crashing sounds in the house can be seen as a bad sign, almost like a warning that someone in the family may soon die. Maybe it was just coincidence, but after my grandmother passed, my mother never forgot it. About 100 days later, we held the memorial ceremony for her. In Thai Buddhist tradition, the 100-day mark is important. It is believed to be a point where the spirit has completed its journey, and the family makes merit, invites monks to chant, and offers blessings in memory of the person who died. That day, our house was packed with relatives. I remember standing downstairs, feeling a little lost and overwhelmed by all the noise and movement. I was still young, and I do not think I fully understood the weight of what the day meant. Then suddenly, I heard people upstairs speaking in anxious voices. And right at that moment, in the middle of the afternoon, a large moth flew into the house. It came straight toward me and landed gently on my dress. It just sat there, completely still. I panicked and shook it off. The moth fluttered down and settled on a stack of folded towels near the staircase. Then it stayed there without moving. My mother saw it and immediately froze. I still remember the look on her face. She quietly went to shut the doors and windows, and for a long time, she just stood there watching it. Other relatives gathered around too, but no one wanted to touch it. It remained there for more than an hour, calm and motionless, as if it belonged there. Then, sometime later, when everyone's attention drifted back to the ceremony, it was gone. No one saw it leave. My mother and several relatives were convinced that the moth was my grandmother, that she had returned to see us one last time on the 100th day after her death. Maybe it was nothing more than chance. I cannot say for sure. But there was one more thing that happened that day, and honestly, it still gives me chills. Those voices I heard upstairs belonged to some family friends who were trying to calm my little cousin. She was only a toddler at the time. Out of nowhere, she pointed behind the adults in the room and said, "Grandma, Grandma is here." Then she said it again. My grandmother had helped care for her too, before she became too sick. So hearing those words from such a small child frightened everyone. Even now, I still do not know what to believe. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe, just maybe, my grandmother really did come back to see us one last time. So, we really believed a quick trip out of the city would make everything better. Me, Rivan, Samir, Annika, and Priya were all exhausted, completely drained from the traffic, the heat, the noise, and that dull feeling of living the same day over and over again. So when Rivan found this ridiculously cheap guest house in a quiet little hill town, it felt like exactly what we needed. The pictures online showed a charming old place with fresh paint, warm lights, and simple but comfortable rooms. Honestly, the low price should have warned us. But we wanted an escape, so we ignored the feeling. By the time we got there, the sun was already going down, and the place looked wrong. It wasn't charming. It wasn't cozy. The walls were stained and peeling. The windows looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years, and the whole place felt colder than the evening air should have allowed. Out front, hanging at an angle, was an old wooden sign that read, "Hollow Lane Guest House." I still remember the caretaker. He stepped out so quietly it startled us. Tall, bony, hollow-faced. He didn't greet us, didn't smile, didn't ask about our trip. He just handed over the room keys and said, in this flat, careful voice, "Your rooms are upstairs. Don't walk around after midnight." We laughed. I wish we hadn't. That first night, the silence was the worst part. There were no crickets, no wind, no distant cars, nothing. Just the old house settling now and then, the floorboards giving these slow little creaks like someone shifting their weight somewhere nearby. I woke sometime around midnight. At first I thought I was dreaming because I could hear whispering in the hallway. Soft, uneven, almost like several people speaking at once. Then it got louder, more urgent. Some voices sounded angry, some sounded terrified. And then I realized, this is the part I still can't explain. They were saying our names. Samir kept insisting it was just the pipes or the wind or maybe people outside. But there was no wind. And when I looked at Annika and Priya, both of them looked just as shaken as I felt. The next morning, we tried to act normal. We even joked about it over breakfast, like saying it out loud would make it less real. Later, while wandering around the back of the house, we found this old locked door near the kitchen. The wood around it was scarred with long, deep scratch marks, like someone had clawed at it from the other side. Priya stepped back immediately. Ravan tried to laugh it off and called it an old pantry or storage closet. But none of us really believed that. The second night was worse. At exactly 1 a.m, the whole house changed. Not gradually, instantly, like something had been waiting for that exact moment. Doors started slamming somewhere upstairs. Heavy footsteps moved across the ceiling even though there was no floor above us. The air turned freezing. Then, at the far end of the hallway, I saw someone standing there. Or something. It was thin and pale, with wet hair hanging over its face. I couldn't make out its features properly, except for these dim reddish eyes glowing underneath the strands. It didn't walk toward us. It sort of glided, slowly, almost gently. And then it spoke. Very softly. Leave. Now. That was enough. And then, just like that, morning came. Sunlight spilled through the dirty windows. The voices stopped. The cold lifted. The front door slowly creaked open on its own. We didn't pack. We didn't speak. We just ran. We left that town without looking back. Later, before we caught the bus home, Priya spoke to an old woman from the village. The woman listened quietly, then leaned closer and said, "That guest house has stood empty for many, many years. It remembers the people who enter. Some come back different. Some never come back at all." We returned to the city, and on the surface, life carried on. Work, traffic, messages, meetings, all of it. But some nights I still wake up shivering, even in warm weather, because I hear someone whisper my name from the darkness beside my bed. And every time that happens, I think of Hollow Lane Guest House. Still standing. Still waiting. And sometimes I wonder if that warning came in time, or if that place has already followed us home. So, my younger brother Mason and I used to cut through the cemetery on the way home. It shaved maybe 15 minutes off the walk from school and work, and after a long day, that felt worth it. Mason loved messing with me. That was just who he was. He knew creepy places got under my skin, so of course he thought it was funny to act like nothing ever bothered him. Anyway, one evening we got off work earlier than usual, and the sun was still hanging low, not quite gone yet. It was the end of August, the kind of time when the air is usually still warm even after sunset. But the second we got near the trees by the cemetery, everything changed. I got this sharp chill all over me. Not just cold exactly, more like the whole place felt wrong. Mason was smacking his gum, loud as ever, and he just laughed and said, "Don't start. We walk through here all the time. It's just dirt and headstones." I didn't argue. I just lit a cigarette and kept walking behind him. Then I heard this awful sound. Wet, panicked, choking. I looked up and it was Mason. I ran to him right away. He was bent over, grabbing at his throat, and I started hitting him between the shoulders as hard as I could. Once, twice, over and over. It felt like forever, even though it was probably only a minute or two. Finally, he coughed up the gum. Later, he said he must have stepped into a dip in the ground, lost his footing, and sucked in air so fast it pulled the gum straight into his throat. The second he spat it out and caught his breath, I looked up, and that's when I saw it. There was something out over the graves. I still can't explain it well. It could have been smoke drifting weird from my cigarette. It could have been a person standing farther off, maybe even some animal moving through the markers. But in that moment, it looked like a shape just hovering there, not quite solid, not quite real. And I can tell you this, every hair on the back of my neck stood up. Mason said later he felt something too. He admitted the air had turned unnaturally cold, but he blamed all of it on choking and freaking himself out. We got out of there fast after that. Neither of us said much. Then, as we were leaving, I noticed one more thing. There was this little orange cat sitting on top of a grave. She was perfectly still, just watching us pass by. She didn't run, didn't meow, didn't even blink much. Just sat there like she belonged in that place more than we ever could. That scared me more than the figure did, honestly. We went home, and after that, neither of us really talked about it. A few days later, I started asking around without making it sound like I was spooked. Just casual questions. Neighbors, friends, anybody who lived near the cemetery. One older man whose backyard backed right up to the fence told me there'd been an orange cat hanging around that cemetery for as long as he could remember. He even showed me an old photo once. And I swear, it looked exactly like the one I saw that night. Same small body, same bright coat, same stare. But here's the strange part. One of the groundskeepers said there was no cemetery cat. Said nobody fed one, nobody kept one there, and he'd never seen any orange cat living on the property. Mason still won't really talk about that night. He says he was choking. He wasn't paying attention to anything around us, and he never saw a cat at all. Maybe he's right. Maybe I was rattled and my mind filled in the blanks. But I still remember how cold it got. I still remember that shape over the graves. I've actually had something like this happen to me, and I still think about it sometimes. It was in 2013, and I was about 11 years old. My family and I had spent several weeks in Slovakia for the summer, and the day we were meant to fly back to England, we had a ridiculously early flight, around 6:30 in the morning. So, of course, my dad woke me up somewhere around 3 a.m. because, parents always want to get to the airport hours before they need to. I remember being half asleep, just dragging myself out of bed, pulling on my clothes, and going downstairs to brush my teeth. Everything felt quiet and heavy, like that strange stillness you only get in the middle of the night. Once we were all ready, we loaded the suitcases into the car, and I climbed into the back seat. Before we drove off, I remember looking back at the house. It was completely dark outside, and I was just sitting there thinking about how much fun I'd had during the holiday. Then I looked up toward the top balcony and saw this little orange glow, like the end of a lit cigarette. At first, I didn't think anything weird about it. Most of my family smoked back then, so I figured someone must have left one burning. I pointed it out to my dad, and he saw it too. He got annoyed straight away, muttering under his breath, and hurried back inside to put it out. The rest of us stayed in the car while we waited for him. And I kept staring up at that balcony. That's when I saw the glow lift up, just slightly, like someone had picked up the cigarette. Then it brightened for a second, like someone had taken a drag, and after that, it lowered again. A moment later, I saw my dad's phone light appear inside the room. He moved through the darkness, reached the balcony area, and then the glow disappeared. Then he came back out to the car. For a second, I tried to convince myself maybe it had been my dad all along. Maybe he'd picked it up before putting it out. But the timing didn't make sense. I had seen the cigarette being smoked before his light even appeared in the room. And that's the part that's always stayed with me. It felt like someone, or something, had been standing up there. Later on, I told my cousin Mila about it. She's only a few years older than me, and she went quiet straight away. Then she said she'd seen something strange there too. Her story happened when they were leaving the house one morning for the airport as well. Only their flight was later, so it was already getting light outside. As they were driving away, she happened to look up toward that same top balcony and saw a figure standing there. She said it raised its arm and gave this slow, deliberate wave. She told me the shape looked wrong somehow. Not clear enough to make out properly, but dark, still, and watching. What really stayed with her was the feeling. She said it felt like it was staring directly at her, like she could feel its eyes following the car as they pulled away. And then there's the last story, the one from my granddad, which somehow makes it all even stranger because he's the least nervous person in the family. He's never been scared of that house. In fact, he always says if anything is there, it should be afraid of him. One afternoon, everyone else had gone out, and he was home on his own, cutting the grass with one of those loud handheld mowers. If you've ever used one, you know they make such a racket that you can barely hear yourself think. He said that while he was mowing, he glanced up toward the same balcony and saw the curtain shift. Just slightly. And behind it, he saw what looked like a dark hand, like someone was pulling the fabric aside to peek out at him. He turned instinctively, really fast, and at that exact moment, the mower struck a stone and sent it flying past where his face had been a second earlier. If he hadn't turned when he did, it could have hit him straight on. He always said whatever spoke to him had warned him. My granddad does believe the house is haunted, in his own way, but he's never been bothered by it. He built that house himself. He bought the land, laid the foundations, and made it into a home. So he just shrugs and says that if there is something there, then it's the guest, not him. And honestly, the way he says it is so matter-of-fact that it almost makes you feel better. Almost. I want to tell you about something strange that happened to me, my sister, and her boyfriend one New Year's Day a few years ago. It was January 1st, 2019, and honestly, the day started exactly the way you'd expect after New Year's Eve. I was wrecked. Hungover, exhausted, anxious, that whole miserable combination. To make it worse, one of my friends and I had made the brilliant decision to walk home from a party in the middle of the night instead of just sleeping there. It wasn't a quick walk either. We ended up stumbling almost 7 kilometers in the freezing cold, completely drunk, and it took forever. At the time, it felt hilarious and adventurous. The next morning, not so much. So, I'm back at my parents' house, lying in my old room, half asleep, still feeling like my body's been hit by a truck. Then I hear this soft little whining sound. At first, I'm confused, just trying to figure out where I am. I look down beside the bed, and there's our family dog, Alvin, staring up at me like, "Come on, get up." He needed to go outside. I'd forgotten my parents weren't home, and my sister was out too, so it was on me. I dragged myself out of bed, threw on some clothes, and took him out. And let me tell you, standing up fast when you're that hungover is brutal. But once I got moving, it helped a little. It was one of those classic Swedish winter mornings on the West Coast. Bitter wind, icy ground, gray sky, that damp cold that gets through everything. The thermometer didn't look that bad, but the wind made it feel way colder. My face was numb in seconds. Still, there was something nice about being out there with Alvin. He was this small, shaggy little poolie, full of personality, and even in that miserable state, I remember thinking how good it felt to have him trotting beside me. When we came back inside, he was in one of those playful moods, totally fired up. I started messing around with him, hyping him up even more, and we had one of those silly little play fights we always used to have. He loved that. I loved it too. I still miss him so much when I think about moments like that. After a while, I gave him a chew bone, and once he settled down, I went back to bed. Now, the layout of the house matters here. My room was right near the hallway, and across from it, a little off to the side, was my old bedroom, the one my sister and her boyfriend were using at the time while they were between apartments. I fell asleep again and didn't wake up until around noon. I got up, made coffee, fixed something to eat, and sat down in the living room with the TV on. The house had a really open layout, so from the living room, you could pretty much see everything except the hallway and the bathrooms tucked back there. And that hallway, I've never liked it. Even in daylight, it always gave me this awful feeling. Like if you walked between the living room and the hall, you could feel something behind you. Not just the sense of being watched, but the feeling of someone being right there, just over your shoulder. Close enough that the back of your neck would prickle. It always made my whole body tense up. Anyway, back to that day. Alvin came over while I was eating and gave me that look dogs have when they know exactly how to manipulate you. So of course I gave him a little piece of my sandwich. Then I let him out on the lawn for a bit, brought him back in, and spent most of the afternoon just lying on the couch recovering. Later that evening, my sister and her boyfriend came home. It was already dark by then, which is completely normal in Sweden that time of year. In winter, it feels like the sun barely shows itself before disappearing again. The mood in the house was actually really nice. My sister and I fought constantly growing up. We could argue over absolutely anything. We knew exactly how to get under each other's skin. But around that time, things had started to soften between us. We were finally acting more like adults, and less like enemies pretending to be siblings. She was pregnant then, very early on, with their first child. She'd told us the news just a little before that, so she wasn't drinking. But her boyfriend and I each had a beer, and we all sat on the couch together with Alvin. He always wanted to be wherever everyone else was. If he wasn't up on the couch with us, he'd disappear against the black, shaggy rug because he was just as dark and scruffy as the carpet. You had to be careful not to step on him. We watched a movie, talked a bit, just had one of those quiet, cozy evenings that feel especially good after the chaos of a holiday. By around 10:30 or 11, we were all tired enough to call it a night. I remember feeling relieved, actually, because I always slept easier in that house when I knew other people were there. So we all brushed our teeth, said goodnight, and went to our rooms. I put on some random YouTube video like I used to do when I wanted background noise while falling asleep. I wasn't fully asleep yet when I heard it. Footsteps coming up the stairs to the front door. Then the sound of the front door opening, then closing again. Then someone walking inside. Alvin exploded into barking and ran straight toward the hallway like he always did when someone came in. But then, suddenly, he stopped. And the silence after that. I still remember it. It was horrible. Thick. Heavy. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat and feel cold spreading through your whole body. I knew my parents were away. They were abroad and weren't due back for another couple of days. So right away I was confused and then scared. I could hear my sister and her boyfriend moving too. They'd heard it. But almost immediately I got this feeling, deep in my gut, that whatever had come in wasn't a person. I know how that sounds, but it was the exact same feeling I used to get in that hallway when I was younger. This dark, angry, overwhelming sense that I was not supposed to step out there. My whole body reacted at once. My throat tightened, my shoulders locked up, my stomach dropped. I could feel adrenaline just flooding through me. At the same time, I was thinking, What if it is a real person? What if someone's broken in? I couldn't just stay in my room and let my sister's boyfriend deal with that alone. And then I thought about Alvin. What if someone hurt him? That was enough. At the exact same moment, my sister's boyfriend and I opened our bedroom doors and looked out. We just stared at each other for a second, both of us with the same expression. And honestly, it would have been funny if it hadn't been so tense. Like something out of a cartoon. I checked Alvin first and saw that he was okay, just confused, standing there staring toward the hall. I asked, "Was that you?" He said, "No, I thought it was you." It was freezing. Proper January cold. Dark as pitch outside, except for the weak outdoor lights and the stars overhead. In front of the house, there was a garage straight ahead, a paved area leading to it, parking off to one side, and the big fenced lawn on the other side with bushes separating everything. There weren't many places someone could hide without us seeing them. We checked everywhere. The driveway, around the garage, by the bushes, the yard. Nothing. No person. No movement. No sound. And what struck me was how fast we'd gotten outside. Whoever we heard would have had only seconds to vanish, and there was nowhere obvious for them to go. We just stood there looking at each other, trying to make sense of it. I remember saying something like, "What just happened? We both heard someone come in." And he said, "There has to be some explanation. There just has to be." My sister came out too and asked what was going on, and we all ended up standing there talking in the cold, trying to come up with anything logical. Maybe the door hadn't latched right. Maybe the wind caught it. Maybe we imagined part of it. But the thing is, it didn't feel like imagination. We heard footsteps. We heard the door. Alvin reacted exactly the way he always did when someone came home, right up until the moment he reached the hallway and went silent. And this wasn't even the first time something like that had happened in that house. Later on, my parents told us they'd experienced the same thing more than once. One of them would be in the kitchen, hear someone come in through the front door, call out thinking the other had arrived home early, and get no answer. Alvin would run toward the hallway barking, then go quiet. And when they checked, nobody was there. I still don't have a clean explanation for it. If it had only happened once, I'd probably chalk it up to a mistake, bad acoustics, a loose door, something like that. But hearing that it had happened several times to different people in the house made it much harder to brush off. What's strange is that it seems to have stopped since my parents replaced the old front door with a newer one that locks automatically. I haven't heard any new stories about the footsteps in a long time, but that night stuck with me. Not just because it was creepy, but because all three of us heard it. It wasn't just a dream, and it wasn't just me being paranoid in that old hallway. To this day, when I think about that house, I still remember that feeling. The footsteps, Alvin barking, the silence right after. That part is what gets me the most. Hello everyone watching the Paranormal M channel. How's your day going? I'm really happy to be here doing what I love, sharing my paranormal experiences with you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks so much for sending in your own paranormal stories, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's paranormal experiences. Good night. Okay, so I don't tell this story often, because it sounds like something you'd hear around a campfire and roll your eyes at. But it happened to me. More than once. And not in some vague, dreamy way. In a clear, I know what I saw kind of way. When I had my first baby, my oldest son, everything about it was already intense. We were at this big teaching hospital, the kind where there are extra people everywhere because everyone's learning. It felt like a stage production of childbirth. Nurses moving in and out, doctors clustered around computers, monitors beeping, the whole room buzzing. I was terrified of hospitals back then, so I did what I always do when I'm scared. I delayed. My water broke early in the morning, and I tried to pretend I could out-stubborn labor itself. By the time I finally came in, I was deep in it. Like, past the point of politely answering questions, past the point of caring who had what clipboard. My husband, Noah, was there. My mom, Diane. My sister, Kelsey. And my mom's best friend, Marla, because of course she came too. She's the "we're doing this together" type. Even my brother-in-law, Sam, was there. The room was bigger than I expected. A window seat along one wall, a recliner, a couple chairs, and a TV mounted on the far side. And that's where he was. In the chair under the TV. A man in a black suit and an old-fashioned hat, like something out of a detective movie. Not flashy, not dramatic, just composed. He wasn't staring at me like a creep, and he wasn't smiling like he knew something. He sat there with his hat in his hands, watching the room the way someone watches a busy airport. Quiet, alert, patient. What's strange is that I never felt fear at first. If anything, his presence felt neutral, steady, like he was there on purpose, but not to interfere. His face was narrow. His eyes were this startling bright blue, and even now when I try to picture him, the details of his features blur, like my brain is trying to protect itself from remembering him too sharply. Hours go by. I'm laboring, breathing, sweating, doing that thing where your body is doing something monumental and you're just strapped in for the ride. Then the staff says it's time to push, and because it's a training hospital, the doctor starts laying down rules. Too many people in here. We need to narrow it down. Only one person can stay. I was exhausted, in pain, and I snapped, because labor turns you feral. I said, "Then what about the man over there? He's not doing anything." The doctor looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "My staff is training," he said. "No," I said, voice rising. "The man in the black suit." And the doctor just stared at the monitor. Not at me, not at the chair, just the monitor, like he couldn't compute the words. I remember Sam, my brother-in-law, leaning in, trying to lighten the moment. "Riley," he said, using my name, "what man are you talking about?" I pointed right at him. I mean right at him. "The man who's been sitting there this whole time." And at that exact moment, the man lifted his eyes and looked straight at me. And something in my stomach dropped like an elevator cable snapped. His eyes weren't just blue, they were intense, like they went through me. I went cold all over. It felt like being seen in a way you didn't consent to. Sam stood up, walked over to the chair, and said, so casually it makes my skin prickle even now, "There's nobody here." And then he sat down in the chair, and the man vanished. Not like he got up and left. Not like he slipped out when I blinked. Just gone. Instantly. And then, because apparently the universe has a sense of humor, during all the chaos of pushing and shouting and nurses moving around, I saw him again. Back in the corner, watching, quiet, still, hat in his hands. And after my son was finally born, when everything blurred into relief and shaking and that crash of hormones, I fell into a heavy sleep. When I woke up, he was gone. For years, my sister and Sam teased me about it. "Your detective friend," they'd say, like it was a funny story, like I'd invented him out of pain and exhaustion. But then came my second birth. Different state, different hospital, much smaller room. This time it was just Noah and me, and him. Same black suit, same hat, same posture, same impossible blue eyes. I didn't say a word this time. I just watched him back. And I swear the energy was different. Not threatening, just charged. Like he was vibrating with this buzzing alertness. Like something was about to happen and he knew it. That delivery was hard. My blood pressure went dangerously high. Things got frantic. And I remember them talking about interventions, about inducing, about getting the baby out safely. I remember Noah's hand squeezing mine. And then I remember blacking out. It wasn't sleep. It was like someone flipped a switch and dropped me into darkness. But in that dark moment, this is the part that still makes my throat tighten. I felt a hand close around mine. Not Noah's. Noah was already holding one hand. This was the other hand. Firm, real, warm. And I knew, without seeing him, it was the man in the suit. Like he'd stepped forward and grabbed me, steadying me, anchoring me to the world until I came back. When I woke up, everything was okay. Baby healthy, me stable, and the man was gone. The third time I saw him wasn't a birth. It was early pregnancy. I started bleeding. I knew in my bones something was wrong before anyone told me. At the hospital, they confirmed it. The pregnancy was ending. They were gentle, but the words still felt like being hit. They prepped me for surgery. Everything was sterile and bright and unbearable. And in the middle of all that heartbreak and noise, I saw him again. Same suit, same hat. Only this time, he didn't linger. He didn't watch. He just turned and walked out the door. And I don't know why, but that crushed me even more. Like, if he was my strange, silent witness, then him leaving felt like confirmation. Like, yes, this is happening, and it's not meant to be stopped. The months after that are honestly a smear. Grief does that. It makes time feel like it's made of fog. Then I got pregnant again. A girl this time. Because of my history, everything about the pregnancy was labeled high risk. More scans, more check-ins, more that constant underlying fear. I tried to stay calm. I tried to be practical. But I was carrying this old dread in my ribs the whole time. When it was time to deliver, I was braced for anything. And he came back. But this time, it wasn't buzzing or cold or sharp. It was warm. Like walking into a room where someone has been keeping the lights on for you. Noah, who had slowly, reluctantly started believing me over the years, leaned close and whispered, "Is he here?" And I whispered back, "Yeah." The man leaned against the wall like he belonged there, like he'd done this 100 times. Hat on this time, almost casual. And for the first time ever, I didn't feel fear when he looked in my direction. The delivery was smooth, almost peaceful considering everything. Afterward, my daughter lay in that clear plastic bassinet beside my bed, tiny and perfect and astonishingly calm. He stood right beside her like a guard, like a proud witness, like someone quietly saying, "You made it. She made it. This is okay." He looked down at her with those bright, piercing eyes, only now they didn't feel like knives. They felt like light. And then he was gone. Not just gone from the room, gone in the way you know something has ended, like a final page turning. I've tried to explain it 1,000 ways. I've asked my mom if we had some long-dead relative who dressed like that. I've dug through old photo boxes, looked at faces until my eyes blurred, hoping to find his. Everyone jokes. Everyone laughs. Everyone says exhaustion, stress, hormones, anything but what I know in my gut. And I'm not even claiming he was an angel. Honestly, if you told me to picture an angel, I wouldn't pick a man who looks like a vintage detective holding a fedora. But I never felt evil from him. Not once. Mostly it felt like presence, witness, protection. Like he wasn't there to change anything, just to make sure I wasn't alone in the moments that split my life into before and after. So I'm left with the question I always circle back to. Has anyone else ever seen someone like that? Someone who shows up during the biggest moments, stands quietly in the corner, and somehow feels like they've always been part of the story. So this happened sometime around 2003, give or take. I was little, maybe 5, and my big sister, Maya, was around 10. It was that deep, quiet part of the night on Christmas Eve, right when it's technically almost Christmas morning, and the whole house feels like it's holding its breath. We lived in this modest, single-story place, nothing fancy, just a cozy home where you could stand in the hallway and see straight into the living room. And every year my mom would set the Christmas tree up just so, angled so the lights were visible from the bedroom hall. You know that look? That soft glow in the dark, the tiny twinkles reflecting off ornaments. It's honestly one of the most magical sights I remember from childhood. That night, I woke up out of nowhere, like wide awake instantly. I remember climbing out of bed and padding into the hallway because I was going to go to my parents' room. Their door was right across from mine. But I didn't make it. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, facing the living room. Because under the tree, there was someone, a man, standing there in a big red suit, sort of hunched a little, placing toys under the branches like he'd done it 1,000 times. And I swear to you, I didn't feel scared. I felt stunned. Like my brain couldn't decide whether to breathe or blink. It was that kind of awe where you don't even move because you don't want to ruin it. He noticed me. He turned his head slowly, looked right at me, and he lifted one finger to his lips, this calm, gentle shh, and he smiled. Not creepy, not sharp, just warm, like, it's okay, but you weren't supposed to see this. And immediately I felt embarrassed. Like I'd broken some secret rule, like I'd messed up the whole thing and maybe, somehow, being caught would mean I didn't get my presents. So I spun around and ran back to my room as fast as my little legs could go, heart pounding, blankets still warm behind me. And then the part that still scrambles my brain happened. My sister Maya suddenly burst into my room like a firecracker. She grabbed my hand and was breathless, whisper shouting that she'd just seen Santa's sleigh outside her window. And I remember thinking, what? No, But there wasn't time to argue. She pulled me down the hall to her room, and we climbed up to look out the window together. And we saw something. Not like a perfect movie scene, more like a glimpse. A shape moving above the trees, and then this faint, impossible silhouette. A sleigh, and little flickers ahead of it that looked like tiny reindeer, like dark cutouts against the night, pulling upward. Just long enough for both of us to register it. And then it was gone. No sound, no lingering, just there, and then not. And what messes with me is, Maya remembers it too. To this day, if I bring it up, she doesn't laugh it off. She remembers the moment, the window, the feeling of urgency, the weird certainty of what we were looking at. We both remember it clearly, like it got branded into our brains. So then you start trying to solve it, right? You grow up and you go, okay, what could that have been? Some trick of light? A plane? A shared kid imagination moment? Maybe. But then there's the man under the tree. My dad still insists it wasn't him. And honestly, I believe him. The person I saw looked old, older than my dad would have been back then. My dad would have been in his early 30s, and this figure had that unmistakable grandfather presence. And my grandfathers were already gone before I was born, so it wasn't like someone familiar was playing a prank. Could it have been an intruder? So I'm left with this story I can't neatly file away. I don't know what it was, but I know what it felt like. The glow of the tree, the hush of the hallway, the strange kindness of that gesture, and the two of us, side by side at the window, watching something impossible rise into the dark and disappear. And I'll be honest, I still wonder. If you've ever had something like that happen, something you and someone else both remember, but you can't explain, I'd genuinely love to hear it. And if you've got a theory that doesn't feel forced, I'm open. Because I've been carrying that Christmas night around for a long time. Hey, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I finally need to tell someone who'll just listen without laughing it off. It happened earlier this year, right at the tail end of summer, those days when the heat hangs around even indoors. My boyfriend, Eli, and I decided to take a lazy midday nap. Nothing dramatic, just one of those, we're both exhausted, let's close our eyes for a bit kind of naps. We laid side by side on the bed, both on our backs. It was so warm we didn't even cuddle, just kept a little space between us so we wouldn't stick together. I remember thinking, this is going to be such a quick, perfect nap. And then, at some point, I woke up. Except I didn't. Not really. I realized almost immediately that I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, like it had been poured into the mattress and set there. I've had sleep paralysis before, just a handful of times over the years, so I recognized the awful, familiar feeling. The panic that comes with it, the helplessness. I did what I always try to do. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, like if I didn't see anything, nothing could happen. And I focused on the tiny things. Wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes. Just one little movement. That was my whole mission. Just get control back. While I'm doing that, I feel someone shift beside me. And then I feel kissing on my neck. Soft at first. Slow. Like someone was being gentle on purpose. My first thought was, oh, Eli woke up. It didn't totally make sense because he doesn't usually do that kind of thing when we're half asleep in the middle of the day, but it also felt weirdly nice for a second. Like my body was responding before my brain had time to question it. Then I felt fingertips trace along my collarbone, like someone was studying it. Not just a casual touch, more like fascination. Like they were learning the shape of me. That's when the discomfort started to creep in, because it wasn't how Eli touches me. It didn't feel familiar. It didn't feel like affection. It felt like someone trying to imitate something affectionate. Then the weight changed. I felt a presence move up over me, hovering, and then settling, like someone climbed onto the bed and positioned themselves above my chest. Not fully crushing me, but enough that I felt pinned, like my breath had to work harder, like the room suddenly had less air in it. The hand moved from my collarbone to my throat, and at first it was still, almost tender, like stroking, circling, pressing lightly. But it was wrong. The touch was too deliberate, too curious, fingers sliding to places that made my skin crawl, like the person touching me had never touched a human neck before and couldn't believe what it felt like. And the whole time, silence. No voice, no whisper, no sleepy little, hey, nothing. Just the soundless presence of someone above me and that hand on my throat. That's the part that really got under my skin. Because even in sleep paralysis, your mind reaches for explanations. It's him. It's a dream. It's your brain glitching. But the longer it went on, the more my stomach dropped with this certainty. That is not Eli. The instant I fully admitted that to myself, like the moment my brain finally said, no, that's not him. The hand tightened. Not gradually, not like a gentle touch turning rough. It snapped into a grip, Fingers clamped down on my throat, firm and purposeful, like it had been waiting for me to notice, like it didn't want to pretend anymore. And then I heard it. The pressure on my throat increased, and I panicked so hard I thought my heart would burst right out of my ribs. I tried to scream. Nothing. Tried to jerk my arms. Nothing. My whole body felt trapped, except my mind, which was absolutely losing it. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, maybe less, but it felt like being held under dark water. Then I snapped awake, like someone cut a cord. I shot up, gasping, sobbing immediately, full body crying, the kind where you can't even catch a breath between tears. I turned to Eli and shook him awake because I needed him grounded and real in front of me. I needed him to speak, to move, to be human. He sat up, confused and sleepy, and pulled me close while I cried into his shoulder like I'd been chased. And I swear to you, this happened. I know how it sounds. I know people will have opinions about what it really was. But I'm telling you as honestly as I can, it felt like something tried to wear my boyfriend's presence for a moment, and the second I recognized the lie, it got hostile. That's why it stuck with me. Because I've had sleep paralysis before, and it was terrifying, but this was different. This felt personal. It felt like something noticed me noticing it, and I've been trying to make sense of that ever since. I was 15 when all of this happened, back when we were still living out on our little place in the Arizona desert. Not the pretty postcard kind of desert either. I mean the real stuff. Sun that feels personal. Wind that drags grit across your skin. And nights so quiet you can hear your own thoughts arguing with you. Even now, years later, I still catch myself thinking about it at random times. Like I'll be doing something normal, washing a dish or driving somewhere, and suddenly my stomach drops because I remember that week. That stretch of days where the desert stopped feeling empty and started feeling occupied. So we had a small spread outside town. Goats, a few stubborn rows of drought-tough crops, and enough distance from neighbors that it felt like we lived on the edge of the world. The closest town was nearly an hour away, and honestly, we liked it that way. The first sign something was wrong wasn't a sound or a shadow. It was the dogs. We had 2 working dogs, both the kind that would throw themselves between you and anything with teeth. They barked at everything. Javelina, bobcats, owls, even a tumbleweed if it hit the fence wrong. But one night, they didn't bark. They wouldn't even step off the porch. They just pressed themselves against the back door and made this low, broken whining sound, like they were trying not to be heard. Tails tucked, ears pinned, staring into the dark beyond our fence line like something out there had them pinned in place. I remember whispering, "What is it?" like they could answer me. My older brother, Caleb, grabbed a flashlight and told me to come help check the pens. The goats had been restless too, and our dad always made us look for holes in the fence whenever the dogs acted strange. Caleb shone the light across the scrub and cactus. It should have been normal, just creosote bushes and rocks and that endless black horizon. But the night felt wrong. Too still. No insect buzz. No wind. Like the whole desert was holding its breath. The next morning, Caleb and I found tracks along the perimeter. Not coyote, not dog. They were vaguely canine, sure, but too big. And the spacing was off, like whatever made them couldn't decide how it wanted to move. There were stretches where it looked almost upright, like a person trying to imitate an animal and doing a bad job of it. We called our dad over, my dad, Ronan, and he studied them longer than I wanted him to. He told us not to mention it to our mom because her blood pressure had been acting up and she doesn't need one more thing to worry about. But his face said plenty. That afternoon is when things stopped being subtle. We were out by the back field, trying to fix an irrigation valve that had cracked. The sun was brutal, and the air smelled like hot metal and dry dirt. Caleb was crouched by the line, Dad was tightening something with a wrench, and I was mostly standing there trying not to fry. And then we heard it. A voice calling from the edge of the salt cedar line. It sounded exactly like my mom. "Sweetheart, you boys out there?" Caleb answered without thinking. "Yeah, Mom, we're right here." The voice came again, closer than it should have been, like it had moved 20 feet in a blink. Okay, I'm coming." Dad straightened up so fast he almost dropped the wrench. He stared at the bushes, eyes narrowed like he was trying to force the heat haze into something solid. He walked toward the salt cedars. "What do you need, babe?" Silence. Just that awful, dry quiet again. He turned back to me and pointed at my pocket. "Call your mother." My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled my phone twice. When she finally picked up, she sounded irritated, like I'd interrupted her on purpose. "What is it?" she asked. "I'm in the kitchen." I swallowed. "Mom, did you just call for us? From outside?" There was this pause, just long enough to make my heart stutter. Then she said, flat and certain, "No, I haven't gone outside. I've been cooking all morning. You must have heard the wind." But there hadn't been any wind. When I hung up, Caleb and Dad were watching me like they already knew the answer and just needed me to confirm it out loud. "She's in the kitchen," I said. "She didn't call us." Caleb's face went pale. "Then what did we hear?" Dad didn't try to explain it. He just said, "We're done for today," and started walking back toward the house like he could outpace whatever had just happened. And I'll tell you the part that still creeps me out the most. The voice we heard was perfect. Too perfect. Like it copied the words and the sound but missed the little human things. No strain, no breath, none of my mom's outdoor holler, none of the tiny cracks she'd get when she raised her voice. It was smooth, like it came out of nowhere already polished. A few days later, one of our goats disappeared, one of our strongest young bucks, a dark-coated one we'd named Jet. He was sturdy, mean in the way bucks can be, and not the kind of animal that just wanders off and gets lost. Caleb and I volunteered to go find him. Dad let us take the rifle, which should tell you everything about how uneasy he already was. By late morning, the heat was climbing fast. The cicadas were screaming in the brush, and every step kicked up little bursts of dust off the trail. We walked for maybe half an hour before I got that feeling. You know it? That prickly, crawling sensation between your shoulders like somebody's eyes are on you. I slowed down and looked around. Nothing. But then the cicadas started to quiet. Not all at once, just like someone was turning a dial down. Caleb noticed too. He looked back at me. "Stay close," he said, like he was trying to sound casual and failing. Then we heard flies. This thick, ugly buzzing off the trail near a cluster of rocks. We stepped off the path and rounded a boulder. And there he was. Jet. Dead. Not just dead, ruined. His belly was opened, and what was inside him had been placed around him in a loose, messy ring. Not neat like a person doing something careful, but not random either. Like something trying to make a shape out of instinct, or imitation, or habit. I gagged so hard my eyes watered. Caleb put a hand on my back and whispered, "Oh my God," like he couldn't say anything else. I remember choking out, "What does that?" He tried to force logic into it. Some drifter, maybe? But even as he said it, his eyes were darting through the brush like he didn't believe his own words. That's when the coyote sound started. Yips at first, far away, then closer, then coming from everywhere. Not like a pack moving in, more like the sound itself was circling us, bouncing around the rocks and brush so we couldn't tell where it was coming from. Caleb grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Now." We ran back down the trail, boots pounding, throat dry, heart smashing against my ribs. And the whole time, those coyote cries followed us, layered and wrong, like someone playing them too loud and too close. We passed between two boulders that sat like gates on either side of the trail, and something in me made me look back. I wish I hadn't. There was a figure on one of the rocks, long dark hair spilled out beneath it, and it looked, at a glance, like a woman. But the longer my eyes were on it, the more my brain started rejecting it. The proportions weren't quite right, the stillness wasn't human, and when it opened its mouth, that sound, that same coyote chorus, but too strong, too controlled, too wrong, came pouring out like it was using the noise as a weapon, like it was meant to confuse us, turn us around, separate us. Then it moved. It dropped off the rock and shifted in this horrible, fluid way, like it was folding itself, rearranging how it walked. One moment it looked upright, the next it was running on all fours like it had always belonged there. And it was fast. Not normal fast, not animal fast, impossible fast. I screamed. I couldn't help it. It was closing the distance like it was gliding, not running. Caleb spun and fired without even stopping. The rifle crack split the air, and the figure snapped sideways, vaulted almost, disappearing into the brush. But it didn't crash through the bushes like anything real would. It didn't make sense. It turned back once and shrieked again, that awful sound, and then it was gone. Caleb was breathing like he'd been underwater. "I hit it," he kept saying, half disbelief, half panic. "I hit it." I looked down and saw droplets on the dirt. Blood. But even that looked wrong. Reddish when the light caught it one way, almost black when I shifted my head. We didn't stop to follow it. We didn't stop to think. We ran until we saw the shape of our house in the distance, and even then, I didn't feel safe until the door was shut behind us. When we told our parents, my mom went strangely quiet and walked back into the kitchen like she needed something to do with her hands. Dad sat at the table and stared at nothing for a long time. He didn't argue. He didn't call us dramatic. He didn't tell us we imagined it. He just looked tired, like this was something he'd been afraid might happen someday, and now it had. A few months later, we sold the goats and left that place behind. No big speeches, no long goodbyes, just packed up and went like the desert had finally asked us a question we didn't want to answer. And we never went back. My parents wouldn't talk about it after that, not once. If Caleb or I brought it up, Dad would shut it down immediately, like speaking about it might invite it into the room. But I still think about it. About the dogs frozen in fear. About my mother's voice coming from the bushes. About that figure wearing something that wasn't just clothing. And sometimes, this is the part I almost hate admitting, sometimes I wonder if it was even chasing us that day, or if it was just making sure we understood we'd been noticed. So, hand on my heart, this really happened. It was just a few weeks ago, on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2025, at my parents' place. I'm changing names here, partly for privacy and partly because it still feels surreal to say out loud. My older brother was there with his wife, let's call her Marina, and my mom had this sweet idea of blending the families for dinner. So she invited Marina's mom, Elaine, and Marina's younger sister, Sophie, to join us at the table. My mom can be adorably formal. Like when she hosts, she hosts. She decided to do place cards, little handwritten name cards set right on the plates like we were at some fancy holiday banquet. She even planned the seating so Elaine and Sophie would be side by side. because she thought it'd be comforting for them to have each other right there. Everything was calm, cozy even. The house smelled like roasted garlic and cinnamon. You know that warm, twinkly kind of Christmas Eve feeling where the night feels soft around the edges? And then it got weird. Later, my mom told us that when she wrote Sophie's card, she has no idea why. Her hand just didn't write Sophie. She wrote Lily. Just like that. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. She set the card down, kept going, and didn't notice anything was off. So we all sit down, plates clinking, chairs scooting, everyone doing that polite little shuffle of, "Oh, I'm here. Where are you? Are we switching?" And Elaine looks at the place setting next to her. She sees the card that says Lily. And she just breaks. Not like a dramatic, attention-grabbing thing, like real, instant, involuntary grief. Her face crumpled, and she started sobbing right there at the table. And for a second, nobody even moved because we didn't understand what we were seeing. We thought maybe she was overwhelmed, or something about the holiday hit her suddenly. Something like that. My mom rushed over, totally alarmed, asking, "What happened? What did I do? Are you okay?" And Elaine, still crying, manages to say, "That was my daughter's name." Silence. The kind that feels heavy in your ears. It turns out Elaine had a little girl named Lily who died when she was about 5 years old. A tragedy they don't talk about much. A wound that never really closes, just gets covered up by years. And here's the part that made my stomach drop. Nobody in my family knew. Not me, not my brother, not my dad, nobody. Marina didn't even mention it to us before, and it wasn't because she was hiding anything. It just wasn't something that came up. Some families don't speak those names out loud often, you know? My mom was shaken to her core. She kept saying, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Why would I write that? Where did that come from?" She looked genuinely scared, like she'd accidentally opened a door she didn't know was there. And I watched her, my mom, who is practical and organized and usually has an explanation for everything, stand there with her hand over her mouth, trying to understand how a name she'd never heard could end up on that card. Dinner didn't exactly go back to normal after that, but something softened. Elaine cried for a while, and Marina held her. My mom kept apologizing, even though Elaine kept insisting she wasn't offended, just stunned. And then, after the initial shock, Elaine said something that still sits in my chest. "It feels like she was here." Not in a scary way, not like a horror movie, more like the tiniest tap on the shoulder. Like, "Hey, I'm still part of this. I'm still with you." And I'll tell you what, ever since that night, whenever I picture the table, I can't help but imagine one extra little presence there. Quiet, gentle, like the room was making space for someone we didn't even know to miss. So yeah, that's what happened. And I'm curious, have you ever had anything like that? One of those moments where reality just blinks? Where something lands in front of you that feels too precise to be random, but too strange to be planned? Okay, so I've never really known how to explain this without sounding a little weird, but I'll just tell you the way it's always felt to me. Like something's been stitched into my life for as long as I can remember. It actually started with my mom, Marisol. She used to casually mention seeing shadows in the corners of rooms, like a person-shaped darkness that didn't belong to anybody. And for years, she didn't even think of it as scary, more like a thing that happened. It wasn't until someone got in her head and said, "What if it's something evil?" that she suddenly got spooked. She told me she stood in the kitchen one night, feeling ridiculous but determined, and said out loud, "You're not welcome here. Leave." And after that, it stopped. just like that. Then she had me, and not long after, she started noticing the shadows again, except this time, always near me. She didn't tell me right away, not when I was little, but she said she'd see that same shape linger in doorways behind me or glide past the hall mirror when I'd walk by. She did the whole leave thing again, and for a long time, it was quiet. Fast forward to when I'm older, maybe 8 or 9 years ago now, and I start noticing it myself. Not every day, not even every week, just enough to make you pause. You know when you think you see someone in your peripheral vision, and you turn and there's absolutely nothing there? That, but heavier, darker, like the room briefly gains an extra presence. Back when I still lived with my mom, we'd hear this sound at night that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. Like heavy footsteps, almost stomping, moving fast down the hallway. Sometimes it sounded like a full-on sprint, and then it would stop right outside her bedroom door. Every time. I was down the hall in the little spare room, and I could hear it so clearly, like the floorboards were complaining under someone's weight. Then, nothing. Just silence, like it wanted us to know it could. What's strange is, when I moved out, my mom stopped seeing it. Like the second I left, it left with me. At my first place, friends started noticing things before I even brought it up. Someone would be sitting on the couch and go, "Did you just walk into the kitchen?" And I'd be like, "No, I've been right here." One friend, Tessa, swore she saw the shape of an older woman standing near the end of the hallway. She even described it in this way that made my skin prickle, like that classic horror movie silhouette. Long dress, stiff posture, not quite human in the way it moved. She compared it to a character from a scary movie she'd watched. Honestly, I don't know if that comparison made it more dramatic in her mind or what, but she refused to use my hallway bathroom after that. She'd literally wait until she got home. I tried to be practical about it. I got one of those motion-sensing cameras. Nothing fancy, just something that records when there's movement. And it would always start recording in the laundry room at night when no one was in there. Not once or twice, constantly. No pets in there, no drafts, nothing. My partner at the time, Nate, got tired of it, and one night he cracked the door open, like he didn't even want to step inside, and he said, in this polite, weirdly respectful voice, "Hey, could you stop walking in front of the camera, please?" And it stopped, like, immediately. The camera went quiet after that, like whatever was triggering it just decided, okay. Then I moved in with my friend Jade, and that's when things ramped up. Jade has her own situation. She's told me for years she sometimes sees something that imitates people. It'll take the shape of someone she loves, or sometimes even me, and she'll watch it walk into another room, but only when she's home alone. Like it wants privacy, like it doesn't want witnesses. One night we were just hanging out in my room, talking about nothing, and suddenly Jade flinched hard, like someone yanked her hair. And I swear to you, I saw her head jerk back, not like she moved it herself, but like something tugged her from behind. She grabbed the back of her neck, wide-eyed, and she said, calm but firm, "No, don't do that." And it stopped. And then, this is the part that still makes my throat go tight. We both saw something move under my bed, like an arm reaching out into the open. Long, thin fingers, too long, and these black hooked nails, claw-like, shiny in the dim light. We froze, and then we snapped on the lamp so fast I almost knocked it over. Nothing. Absolutely nothing under the bed, just dust bunnies and a forgotten sock. After that, my boyfriend Eli started having experiences too. If he's alone in my room, even for a few minutes, he'll get poked in the back, like a single finger jab. Or he'll see something peek up from the side of the bed, just barely visible, like it's watching him and waiting to see if he reacts. Eli's approach is to pretend it's not happening. He'll literally look straight ahead and go, "Nope," and change the subject like he's refusing to give it the satisfaction. I felt it too when I'm alone. Sometimes it's like a touch at the crown of my head, gentle, almost curious, and then it slides outward along my hairline, like hands framing my face. Not squeezing, not hurting, just there. When that happens, I usually shift around, sit up, turn the light on, do something to break the moment. And after that, it'll stop for the night. Jade has told me she's heard my door handle jiggle when I'm not home, like someone trying to get in. And the cats, this is the weird part. The cats will stick their paws under the door like they're playing with someone on the other side. They don't seem afraid at all. But sometimes the dogs refuse to go near my room, like there's an invisible line they don't want to cross. They'll stand in the hallway, stare, and then back away with their tails low. And through all of this, the main thing I can't shake is the feeling of being watched. Not necessarily threatened, just observed. Like I'm sharing space with something that's been paying attention for a long time. Here's the part that makes people look at me like I've lost it. Lately, I've started talking out loud to the room. Not full conversations, more like announcements. If I'm leaving for the weekend, I'll say, "Okay, I'm heading out. Be good." If I'm going to work, I'll say, "Bye, see you later." And sometimes when I walk in, I'll jokingly say, "Boo," like I'm trying to keep it light. And for me, it doesn't feel oppressive. It doesn't feel like my space is unsafe. But anyone else who goes into my room eventually says it feels heavy, like the air gets thicker, like they can't fully breathe until they step back into the hallway. I also have a sleep recording, one of those apps that records if you talk in your sleep. And there's this moment where something clearly says my name. It's not me. You can hear me breathing right after, like I'm still asleep. That clip still gives me chills because it's so casual, like someone said it just to see if I'd respond. And honestly, the strangest part is that I'm the calm one. I'm the one who can live with it. And that makes Jade nervous because she's like, "How are you not terrified?" And I don't have a good answer. It's just familiar. Like it's been circling my life for so long that my body has learned how to carry it. So yeah, that's my story. Something followed my mom, then found me, and it's been trailing behind me through different homes like it's stubborn, or attached, or maybe just interested. I don't know what it is. I don't even know what I believe it is. I only know what I've seen, and what I've felt, and the way it never seems to fully leave. So before I jump in, I should probably tell you this. Ever since I was little, I've felt things. Like I can pick up on energy in a room, or sense when something is about to happen. When I was a kid, I got in trouble for it a lot. My family thought I was trying to scare my siblings or just making stuff up. Eventually, around middle school, I learned to keep my mouth shut about it. I told myself I was being dramatic. I tried to be normal about it. But then this happened. It was my junior year of high school, and my mom, well, Marisol, and her husband Derek and I had just moved into this new apartment. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms. We had 2 dogs, their dog, Nala, and my dog, Biscuit. Biscuit was glued to me, always. My room was kind of tucked away behind the living room, like its own little corner. When you walked in, straight ahead was Biscuit's crate. My bed was along the far wall to the right of that. If you turned right, you'd see my desk first, and then my closet right beside it. The closet was the closest thing to my desk. That detail matters. We'd been moving a lot, so I was doing online school at the time. Most days I'd be planted at my desk with my big over-ear headphones on, music loud enough to drown out the world, and Biscuit stretched out on the floor next to my chair like my little bodyguard. And my mom, Marisol, was strict. The kind of strict where you learn to sense her presence before she even speaks. I don't know how else to explain it. Even with my headphones blasting, I could usually tell when she came home. And sometimes she'd come into my room and just stand behind me, silent, waiting for me to notice her, like it was some test. One afternoon, Marisol and Derek left to run errands, and I was rushing to finish this project I'd procrastinated on. I had my music up high, head down, trying to focus. Except I kept getting this strong feeling that my mom was standing right behind me. It was so specific, like I could feel her there. I took off my headphones and turned around. Nothing. Then I did it again. And again. I think I checked 4 times. At one point, I even got up and walked through the apartment to see if they'd come back without me noticing. Nope, empty. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself, "You're stressed. You're paranoid. You're just anticipating getting yelled at for not finishing your work." But I couldn't shake it. That feeling just lingered in the air, like static. Then about half an hour later, I got hit with this sudden rush of adrenaline. You know when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and your body reacts before your brain catches up? It was exactly that. And I swear everything I'm about to tell you happened in maybe 2 minutes, but it's burned into my memory like it happened yesterday. I grabbed my phone off the desk with one hand, and with the other, I lifted one side of my headphones off my ear. And that's when I heard Biscuit. He was growling. Not his normal warning growl. This was low, deep, like it came from somewhere older inside him. I'd never heard him make that sound before. I spun around, half standing up, and there he was behind my chair, stiff as a statue, staring straight into the open closet. At the exact same time, I heard Nala in the living room, barking like crazy at my closed bedroom door. Aggressive, frantic barking. And my brain went, "Someone's in the closet." I yelled, "I have a weapon!" Which, just to be clear, I did not. I stepped into the closet, heart pounding, and leaned around the doorframe, checking behind hanging clothes, scanning the corners. Nothing. And I remember this split-second thought in my head, this tiny little voice going, "What the hell?" And then a suitcase on the shelf to my left fell. It didn't slide. It didn't gently tip. It dropped like someone had shoved it. It hit the floor hard and landed so close to me, like inches. Close enough that if I'd been one step over, it would have clipped my leg. Both dogs lost it completely. Biscuit went from growling to barking and jumping, like he was trying to get between me and the closet. Nala was still going wild at the door. And that was it. Every rational thought left my body. I yanked Biscuit by the collar, threw my bedroom door open, and we bolted out of the apartment so fast, I'm pretty sure I made some awful squeaking scream without realizing it. We were outside for maybe 5 seconds before my brain caught up and went, "Nala." I had left her inside. I whipped back, flung the door open, and thank God, she was already sprinting after us. I grabbed her collar too, and that's when I realized my phone was gone. I must have dropped it in the scramble. But I didn't care. I just ran down the stairs with both dogs, hands shaking, heart hammering so hard it felt like it was rattling my ribs. When I hit the bottom, I just stopped and stood there, like my body didn't know what to do next. No leashes, no phone, just me and 2 terrified dogs. Our garage was in a separate detached building, so I dragged them over there because it felt safer. Like at least it wasn't inside that apartment. I borrowed enough calm to go back and retrieve my phone. Then I called Marisol and asked when she'd be home. I tried to sound normal, but my voice was trembling. And then I just waited in the garage with the dogs pressed against me like we were hiding from a storm. When Marisol finally got home, She went into my room to check everything. She didn't believe me. She shrugged it off and said it was a coincidence, that maybe the suitcase just fell because it wasn't balanced right, and told me to drop it. But I couldn't. For weeks after that, I couldn't stand having my headphones on. I hated not being able to hear what was happening around me. I'd flinch at little sounds. I'd stare at that closet like it had teeth. And the thing is, nothing like that ever happened again in that room. No more flying objects. No more intense moments like that. But I still think about it because I'm usually the first person to look for a logical explanation. I want things to make sense. Except that suitcase was laid flat, and it wasn't even wider than the shelf it was on. There was no way my movement caused it to fall. I wasn't even touching the shelf. And Biscuit? I've never seen him react like that to anyone. Not once. Not before, not after. So yeah, I don't know what was in that closet. But whatever it was, both dogs knew it was there. And for 2 minutes, so did I. So, this was back when we lived in Berlin, and I'm pretty sure it was 2009-ish. Somewhere around that era where time feels a little blurry, you know? My older brother, let's call him Jonas, was around 9 or 10, and I was maybe 6. We had this little tradition where we'd do sleepovers even though we lived in the same apartment. Like, very serious business. One of us would drag a blanket or a pillow, or, if we were feeling ambitious, an entire mattress, and we'd camp out in the other one's room like we were on some kind of important mission. That night, it was my turn to bring the mattress. I hauled it into Jonas's room and shoved it right up beside his bed so we were basically shoulder to shoulder. We stayed up doing all the usual kid sleepover stuff, telling dumb jokes, making up creepy stories that weren't even that creepy, and playing games on this old handheld console until our eyes started doing that slow, heavy blink. And then, in the middle of the night, honestly it had to be somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, I woke up and looked out into the hallway. Our hallway wasn't really a hallway. It was more like this wide open space that connected everything, like the apartment's little center stage. From Jonas's doorway, you could see toward the kitchen area, and that's exactly where my eyes landed. And there, just standing there like it was the most normal thing in the world, was a woman. She had light hair, and she was wearing this deep red dress, like a formal dress, something you'd see at a fancy event. What really stuck out was that it shimmered a little, like it had sequins or glitter woven into it. Not bright and flashing, just subtly sparkly, like it was catching light that shouldn't have been there. I remember just staring, very quietly, like my brain was trying to decide if I was still dreaming. So I leaned over toward Jonas and whispered, "Hey, are you seeing that?" And he kind of propped himself up, squinted into the hallway, stared for a few seconds, way too calmly for a kid, and then he just goes, "Yeah, I see it." We both lay there watching. A moment later, a man stepped out from the kitchen area. He looked like he was dressed up too, dark suit, neat and formal, like he belonged at some elegant party. And he walked over to her and handed her a glass, like maybe champagne or wine, and she took it like this was all routine, like they were mid-conversation and he'd just gone to refresh her drink. But here's the part that still makes my stomach do that weird flip. They didn't have faces. Not like shadowy faces, or faces hidden in darkness. I mean, where their facial features should have been. Eyes, nose, mouth. There was just nothing. Like smooth darkness. Like their faces were cut out and replaced with a black, empty void. No expression, no glint of an eye, nothing to focus on. And even stranger, I wasn't scared. I wasn't trembling or hiding under the blankets or calling for our parents. I was just fascinated, like I'd stumbled into something rare, and my brain filed it under interesting instead of dangerous. They didn't look at us, not once. They didn't react. They didn't even seem to notice we were there. They just kept talking to each other because their body language looked like conversation, except there was no sound at all. Not a whisper, not footsteps, not the clink of glass. Just silence. And I remember thinking, very logically, like a curious little scientist, I should go touch them. Like, just reach out and see if they're real. I actually suggested it out loud to Jonas. I was like, I'm gonna go see what happens if I touch them, which honestly is such a specific fear. Like, why that? Why not they'll grab you or they'll scream? No, straight to your hand will rot off. So I stayed put. We watched them for a while longer, long enough for it to feel almost boring, which is ridiculous considering what we were looking at. And eventually we just decided to go back to sleep. Like, all right, nothing's happening. Good night. And that's the part that unsettles me the most now as an adult. Because why weren't we terrified? What kind of kids see two faceless, void-faced people in formal clothes calmly having a silent little midnight cocktail moment in the hallway and just roll over and fall asleep? I still don't know what to call it. It didn't feel like a nightmare. It didn't feel chaotic or threatening. It felt weirdly coherent, quiet, almost polite. Like we accidentally witnessed something we weren't invited to, but also weren't in danger from. And I've wondered ever since, has anyone else ever seen something like that? Something that didn't feel like shadow people exactly, because this wasn't frantic or scary. It was calm, almost normal. Just impossibly normal. So yesterday at work, I'm doing my usual thing, standing at the computer, knocking out tasks, half in autopilot. A customer I'd been helping, this woman named Marissa, makes small talk while I'm finishing up. Super friendly, calm energy. At some point she goes, really casually, "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" And I'm like, "Sure." She asks if I've ever had anything paranormal happen to me. And honestly, not really. I tell her, no, nothing personal. But I also add that I'm not one of those people who immediately shuts it down. Like, I've watched the shows, listened to the podcasts, read the stories. I'm interested in it. I just haven't had my own moment. She gets really still for a second, like she's deciding whether she should say what she's about to say. Then she leans in a little and goes, "I'm not trying to scare you. I feel like I should tell you something." Already my stomach drops a little. She gestures toward this big mirror we have at the job, one of those oversized ones where you can see half the room behind you. And she says that for a split second, in the mirror, she saw something standing right behind me while I was facing the computer. And I'm thinking she's going to say like, "Oh, a shadow," or "Someone walked by," something normal. Nope. She tells me it was tall, too tall, a black hooded figure. And the part that made my skin go cold when she said it, it had this really pale, white face and this wide grin that felt wrong, like it was smiling on purpose, like it knew it had been seen. I remember just staring at her, trying to process what she was even saying. I didn't feel anything. I didn't notice anything. I didn't get goosebumps or a chill or that someone's behind you feeling people talk about. Nothing. I was just working. So I blurt out, "Wait, do you see stuff like that often?" She nods like it's not a huge deal, like she's describing the weather. She says, "Yeah, pretty much all the time." But then she immediately follows it with, "I've never seen that before. That's why I'm saying something. I don't usually tell strangers things like this." And here's the thing. She wasn't acting dramatic. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't trying to perform. She looked genuinely unsettled, like she wished she could unsee it. She was with 2 other women, and they all seemed normal. Not spooky, not attention-seeking, just polite customers who happened to be together. One of them even gave me this sympathetic look, like, "I'm sorry you're hearing this right now." Before they left, Marissa gives me this little list of advice. Quiet, serious, like she's trying to help. She tells me if I have mirrors in my bedroom, I should consider taking them out. She says to say a prayer, whatever that means to me, and to think about getting a cleansing done, like a spiritual cleanse or a home cleanse. And after they walk away, I'm just standing there at the computer, feeling stupidly exposed. Like I want to turn around and check behind me even though I know I won't see anything. But now I can't stop imagining what she described. Like it planted a picture in my head that I didn't ask for. Since then, my brain keeps bouncing between 2 extremes. 1. What if she really saw something? What if there was something behind me and I just didn't register it? And I'll be real, I'm a trusting person. I've been told I'm a little gullible. So I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground here. I even went home and tried looking it up, because of course I did. I found stuff that's kind of in the same universe. Shadow people, hooded figures, that whole vibe, but nothing that matched the details. And I kept thinking, is this like that Hat Man thing people talk about? But the way she described it didn't sound like that at all. No hat, just a hood, a pale face, and that grin. So now I'm stuck in this uncomfortable middle zone where I don't know what to believe. I'm not trying to turn this into a whole haunting situation. I just genuinely don't know what to do with it. Do I shrug it off as a weird customer moment? Or do I take the advice seriously, move a mirror, say a prayer, do something small just to feel like I'm not ignoring it? Because the creepiest part isn't even the image she described. It's the fact that she seemed so sincere. And I can't stop wondering why she felt like she had to tell me. So, I've been doing a bit of digging on my own, trying to make sense of what's been happening, and I ended up stumbling across this old post from a few years back that felt way too familiar. And before I even get into it, I think it matters that this house is old. The kind of old where the floors complain when you breathe too hard. And there's history here too. Like, heavy history. I've heard stories about tragic accidents that happened in the house a long time ago, and even though I try not to fixate on it, it sits in the back of your mind once you know. I live here with my boyfriend, Elliot, and his family. We've been here a little over 2 years now. They've lived in this place since, I want to say around 2020? Something like that. It's one of those details that gets fuzzy because the days blur together when you settle into a house. The first time something happened, I brushed it off so fast. It was early last year. I was downstairs and I swear I saw Elliot's sister Talia come out of her room and head toward the staircase like she was going down. It was just a quick glimpse. Nothing dramatic, nothing movie-like. Just normal. Except she hadn't even been home that day. Not for hours. So it couldn't have been her. Still, you know how it is. Your brain tries to be helpful. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe it was my eyes playing tricks. Maybe I just assumed. So I filed it away and tried not to be weird about it. Then later in the same year, something happened that I couldn't file away so easily, because it wasn't just me. Elliot was upstairs walking down the hall toward the bathroom, and as he's walking, he sees me lean around the corner of the spare room, like I'm waiting to jump out and scare him. And honestly, that's totally something I do. We mess with each other like that all the time. So he starts laughing and calling my name in that teasing way, like, "Nice try. Caught you." And I hear him from the bathroom, because I'm already in there. I remember calling back, confused, and then he comes to the bathroom door still half laughing, until he sees me standing there. And the way his face changed, I'll never forget it. The laughter just dropped out of him. It was like his brain hit a wall. He told me exactly what he saw. My face peeking out, the quick movement, the sense that I was waiting to scare him. And I'm standing there telling him, "No, I've been in the bathroom the whole time." And for a second, I genuinely thought he was messing with me, like some drawn-out prank. But he wasn't. The thing is, the layout of the upstairs makes his explanation impossible. Like, physically impossible. For it to have been me, I would have had to sprint from the spare room area, past him without being seen or heard, get into the bathroom, and close the door. All in the tiny amount of time it took him to reach the end of the hallway. And there's no way. The hall creaks, the doors click. You can hear everything. He would have seen me. He would have heard me. There's just no way. So that shook me. Not because it was ghostly, but because it was specific. Like something trying to copy a real person in a real moment. And then last night happened. Elliot's dad, Graham, pulled me aside in the morning, looking serious but also kind of uneasy, like he wasn't sure how to even ask. He said, "Did you come into my room last night to use the ensuite?" And I said no immediately, like absolutely not. But Graham insisted he saw me. He said it was clear as day. Not a shadow, not a blur. Me, walking into his room, going into the ensuite, using the toilet, and walking back out again like it was completely normal. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. He told me what I was wearing. A couple weeks ago, my mom gave me this cozy white oversized hoodie, one of those big blanket-style ones, and he said that's what he saw on me. Except, I wasn't wearing it last night. I hadn't touched it. I actually remembered that it was hanging on a hook inside the spare room door because I'd put it there earlier that day. So now I'm standing there with this awful, crawling feeling, because how do you explain that? How do you explain someone seeing you, dressed like you, moving like you, doing something you would never do, while you're nowhere near them? And that's what gets me the most. It's not just footsteps or a door creaking. It's not vague. It's not the kind of thing you can easily laugh off. It's the fact that whatever it is, if it is something, is choosing to look like us, like it's practicing, like it wants to blend in, like it's trying to be believable. And now I keep thinking about those 3 moments. The glimpse of someone who shouldn't be there, the me in the hallway when I was already in the bathroom, and then Graham seeing me in his room, wearing something I own but wasn't even wearing. And I don't know what the answer is. All I know is it's getting harder to tell myself it's nothing. Because when multiple people are seeing the same kind of thing, something that looks exactly like a real person, it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like something else entirely. Hey, so let me tell you something that still gives me that weird little chill when I think about it. This happened back in 2020, around the height of the pandemic, when everything felt quieter than it should have been. I'm originally from Caracas, but at the time I was staying with my family in the mountains, at my grandparents' place in the state of Mérida. I was there with my mom, Mariela, and a bunch of relatives who all kind of moved through the house like we were sharing one long, anxious breath together. My grandparents' house had this higher spot, almost like a rooftop lookout, where you could actually catch enough signal to get online. So late at night, when everyone was asleep and the house felt too still, I'd sneak up there with my phone. There was also this small little room up top, like a mini house within the house, that used to belong to my Uncle Rafa, who passed away years ago in an accident. Nobody really used it anymore. It always smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and it had this feeling like time had gotten stuck in the corners. One night, really late, like around 2:40 in the morning, I was up there alone. The air was cold in that thin mountain way, and the moon was bright enough that everything looked silver at the edges. I had my headphones in, watching random videos, scrolling, trying not to think too much. And then, bang! Something hit the roof. Not like a little twig falling. This was heavy, sharp, loud enough that my whole body tensed up before my brain even caught up. I froze, staring at my phone like it could explain what I just heard. Then came the second part, footsteps. The roof was those big metal sheets, tin, zinc, whatever you want to call it, and the sound traveled. I could hear it clearly, slow, deliberate steps moving across the roof above me. I remember whispering to myself, okay, it's probably just a bird. It's always a bird. But then it happened again, soft tapping, not stomping, not scratching, tapping, like someone politely knocking. And listen, I know how this sounds, but it didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but I also kind of am. I grabbed this old stick leaning in the corner, like a broom handle that had survived 3 generations, and I slammed it hard against the ceiling and said, loud enough for whatever it was to hear, "Hey, don't start with me tonight." And then I laughed, this ridiculous villain laugh, like I was auditioning for a low-budget horror movie. I think I was trying to convince myself I wasn't scared. After that, I stepped outside and looked up, and I saw it. A big black bird, huge, bigger than I expected, perched on the edge of the roof. It looked like one of those buzzards people call zamuro back home. Dark body, heavy presence, just watching me like it had been there longer than I had. I actually said out loud, "What is that?" And then, this is the part that surprises even me, I didn't run. I just turned away slowly and walked back inside like I was the one in control. In my head, I kept thinking, don't show fear. Don't show fear. Just act normal. Because here's the thing. Weird stuff had happened up there before. Little thumps. A single loud hit like something dropped. But it was always brief, like it just wanted to remind me it was there. That night felt like a warning with extra emphasis. And I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That night was different. Too quiet, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I stood outside the little room, leaning against the wall, scrolling, waiting for the signal to stabilize. And then, another impact. But this time, it was harder, like something heavy dropped straight onto the roof. Immediately, the footsteps started again, faster, circling, pacing, back and forth, like it was patrolling. My stomach sank, my hands went cold. I could feel my skin tighten the way it does when fear hits you before your mind can make a plan. And I remember telling myself, almost like an order, don't even think about running. So I stayed. I just stood there, trying to breathe normally, pretending I wasn't a person alone in the dark under a roof that suddenly had company. The steps moved, slower now, more focused, like whatever was up there had made a decision. And then it walked until it was directly above me, right over my head. And I felt pressure, like it was poking at the roof, testing the metal. Tap, 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 right above where I stood. That was it. That was my limit. I turned my phone off, like the glow was making me a target, and I walked back to my grandparents' house as calmly as I could manage. It wasn't far, maybe 15 meters, but it felt like a whole desert. I didn't look back. I didn't run. I just walked fast, with my heart practically punching my ribs from the inside. After that, I stopped going up there. I didn't want answers badly enough to keep inviting whatever that was. Signal wasn't worth it. Curiosity wasn't worth it. But I'll be honest with you, I've never stopped wondering. People in that area always talked about witches, about things that roam at night, about signs you shouldn't ignore. I don't know what I believe. I'm not even saying it was something supernatural, but I am saying this: it didn't feel like coincidence. So, if you've ever heard of anything like that, if you know what it could have been, or why a huge black bird would act like it owned the roof above my head, tell me. Because I've carried that question around for years, and it still feels like unfinished business. So, lately I've started feeling this really unsettling thing when I'm trying to sleep. Like I'm not alone. Like someone's watching me, even when the room is silent and still. This all kicked off a little before Christmas 2025, when I was staying at my grandpa's old place. It's one of those houses where people step inside and immediately say, "Yeah, something feels off." Everybody who's ever slept there has had some weird story or some heavy feeling they can't explain. The rumor in the family was that the previous owner's wife, Marianne, I think her name was, never really left. My grandma, Ingrid, always said she could feel her the most. She'd get tense the second she went anywhere near the upstairs, like the air got thicker. And Grandma would swear this presence had an attitude, like it was angry or annoyed that we were there. Even my sister, Tessa, who normally rolls her eyes at anything paranormal, went quiet one evening because she said she suddenly felt heavy and nauseous standing beside Grandma on the stairs. We actually laughed about it at the time. Not in a mean way, just like, okay, sure, haunted staircase, whatever. We brushed it off. That was earlier in the day. That night, I went to bed and fell asleep like normal, until I woke up out of nowhere. You know that weird kind of waking where your eyes open but your body still feels half stuck in sleep? The room was pitch black, and I had this instant, electric feeling of wrongness, like something had been there before I even opened my eyes. I stared into the darkness, trying to get my bearings, and then the bedroom door slowly opened. At first, I thought it was someone checking on me. But the hallway light that came in wasn't bright. It was dim, like it had been lowered on purpose. And in that low light, I saw a tall figure in the doorway. It looked human, but it didn't look like a person. Just black. Like the outline of someone, but with no face, no detail. It was just standing there, still as a statue, facing into the room. I remember my stomach dropping like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just shut my eyes and tried to convince myself I was dreaming. And at some point, I must have fallen asleep again, because I woke up in the morning like nothing happened. 2 days later, I casually joked about it to my mom like, "Haha, guess I saw a shadow man." I acted like it didn't bother me. I even sort of laughed while I said it, like that would make it smaller. But it didn't feel small. The next evening, this was the day after Christmas, I was exhausted. I went to bed early and passed out fast. And then it happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night, and the room was almost completely dark. But this time, the door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open just enough to let in a thin strip of light. Barely anything, but enough. And there it was again. The same black figure. Only this time, it wasn't standing. It was sitting on a chair near the foot of the bed, maybe 2 meters away. Close enough that I could tell exactly where it was. And the worst part? It wasn't even looking at me. It was facing the wall, like it was waiting. Like it had been there for a while and didn't care that I'd noticed. That made it feel deliberate. Like it was choosing to be there, I squeezed my eyes shut again, the same way I did the first time. I basically went into nope mode, and somehow I fell asleep again. When I woke up in the morning, everything was normal. For a while, I didn't tell anyone about the second night. I tried to keep it locked away, like if I didn't talk about it, it couldn't follow me into the daylight. But then, a few days later, my mom and I visited one of her old friends. Her name's Selena. The second we stepped into Selena's house, I got that same feeling again. You know when your body reacts before your brain can explain why? Like your skin knows something you don't? Selena and my mom sat talking on the couch, catching up, while I played with Selena's dog, this sweet, energetic thing named Bruno. He was friendly, but I remember him pausing every now and then, like he was listening for something that wasn't there. And somehow, the conversation drifted toward weird experiences. I don't even remember who brought it up first, but my mom mentioned what I'd told her, and I added a few details. That's when Selena went quiet and said, "Wait, hold on." And she pulled out her phone. She showed us a video of Bruno barking at a blank wall. Just barking and barking like someone was standing right in front of him. On the video, there was nothing. No shadows, no movement, no sound. Just the dog losing his mind at empty air. Then she showed us another video. She had this toy ball on a shelf. It was one of those motion sensor toys that lights up in different colors when it's touched. The shelf was high enough that the dog couldn't reach it, and nothing was near it. In the video, the ball starts flashing like it's being nudged, colors cycling like someone's tapping it. And the whole time I'm watching, I'm thinking, I knew something felt wrong the second I walked in here. My stomach was twisting. I kept trying to act normal, but inside I was just thinking, I want to leave. I want to leave right now. We stayed maybe another 15 minutes after that, and then I made up some excuse like being tired. We left pretty quickly. That night, I actually slept fine. But the next night, my last night in that house before the long drive home, was the one that really stuck to me. I went to bed around 10:30 p.m. I fell asleep, and then I woke up again in the middle of the night to complete darkness. No light through the door this time, just black. And that same feeling returned, like my back was exposed, like something was hovering just out of sight. I tried to stay still and breathe slowly, hoping it would pass. But the longer I lay there, the worse it got. Then, the bed shifted. Not like I rolled over, not like the mattress settling. It felt like weight had pressed down, like someone had climbed onto the bed behind me. And I froze, because I could feel it. That awful claustrophobic closeness, like when someone stands too close to you in a hallway and your body screams at you to move away, except I couldn't move away. It felt like someone was right behind me, close enough that if I turned around, I'd be face to face with whatever it was. I remember trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the bed creaked, that the house shifted, that I was half asleep. But my body didn't believe that. I was terrified, like real stomach-deep fear. And somehow, I still fell asleep again, like my brain just hit an emergency shut-off switch. And it's true. I haven't seen the figure again. But the feeling? That lingering sense of being watched when I'm trying to sleep. It never fully went away. Even now, sometimes I'll be lying in bed in a perfectly normal room, in a perfectly normal house, and my body will suddenly react like it's back there again. Like something is standing just out of sight, waiting for me to open my eyes. So, I've been sitting with this for a while, and I'm going to tell it the way it actually feels. Small moments that sound easy to brush off, but somehow stick to you. The first time I can remember, I was still pretty young, somewhere around the late 2010s, maybe 2018 or so. I don't know the exact date, I just remember the vibe of that age. I'd just gotten out of the shower and walked back into my room, towel still on, hair dripping a little. And on the carpet near my desk, there was this thin little instruction sheet from a toy set, like one of those big kid building blocks. And I swear to you, the second I stepped into the room, that paper shifted. Not like a slow slide, more like a quick, twitchy little jerk, like someone had flicked the edge of it. I froze, because nothing else moved. The air didn't feel drafty. The windows were closed. The door was shut. I even stood there staring at it like, okay, do it again. But it didn't. After that, it wasn't constant. It was more like occasional weirdness. My bedroom door would sometimes ease open on its own even though I know I'd pulled it closed. Not violently, not like a horror movie. Just enough to make you look up and go, wait, what? And then, honestly, things went quiet for years. Like it all just stopped. Or at least, I stopped noticing anything. But then, more recently, maybe starting last year, little things came back, and it felt more frequent. A door that was definitely closed ending up slightly open. A light being on that I don't remember turning on. And the biggest part isn't even the doors or lights. It's this feeling that creeps in sometimes, like I'm not alone in the room. And I want to be really clear. I know how that sounds. I'm not saying I'm being haunted, and I'm not even claiming any of it is real in a supernatural way. I'm fully aware that stress, sleep, attention, lighting, anxiety, your brain can do a lot. But the feeling is specific. It's like there's something just behind me, close enough that if I turned too fast, I'd bump into it. I catch myself glancing over my shoulder for no reason. A couple of times, I've had these quick visual moments too. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a full shape or a person, just this split-second, milky blur, like a smudge passing through part of my vision. It happened a few times across different days, always super brief, like my eyes couldn't quite focus before it was gone. And every time, my brain immediately tries to explain it away. Floaters, light glare, tired eyes, whatever. But it still rattled me. And then there was this one moment that really got under my skin, because it didn't feel like it was only in my head. About a week ago, I was on a video call, FaceTime, with my partner Maya. I was sitting on my bed, phone propped up, just talking like normal. And at one point, I glanced at the screen, and in the camera view, behind me, there was this shape for a fraction of a second. It looked like a head, like something leaned in and then vanished. What makes all of this confusing is that it doesn't always happen when I'm primed for it. Like, sometimes I'm not thinking about anything spooky or paranormal at all. I'm just living my life, and then something small happens, and my body reacts before my logic can catch up. And then the logic arrives and starts listing possibilities. Drafts, hinges, electricity, memory lapses, expectation effects, tired eyes, stress. All of it makes sense. And still, it leaves this uncomfortable little question mark. There's one more thing that might matter, or might mean nothing. My mom, Elena, has told me she's had intense experiences in the past. She doesn't like talking about it. But years ago, she once admitted she used to feel like something was after her. And the way she said it wasn't casual. It sounded heavy, like it genuinely scared her. I don't know details, and I don't push because it clearly upsets her. But part of me wonders if that's relevant, or if I'm just connecting dots that don't belong together. I am religious, and that gives me comfort. But I'm not using faith as a catch-all explanation here. I'm actually trying to stay grounded. I want rational ideas, environmental stuff, psychological stuff, neurological stuff, anything I might be overlooking, like sleep issues, stress responses, vision quirks, wiring, old doors, airflow, even subtle things like routines and memory. I guess what I'm really asking is, has anyone else had a string of experiences like this? Not a single spooky incident, but this slow accumulation of small moments that make you wonder if you're just noticing more, or if something in your environment, or your brain, is changing. Because I'm not trying to convince myself of anything. I just want to understand what could cause it, and why it feels so real when it happens.